It's 2020. The government's looking for new ways to diversify their funding and try to raise a lot of money because it's a pandemic. The government spending is really ramping up. And they try to find a new source of the funding, and they studied a lot of ways, including selling 50-year bonds or 100-year bonds. The government have an advisory committee. They try to convince that notion that it's not a good deal to sell really long bonds, 50 or 100-year bonds, because it's even more expensive. Nobody's going to buy it. So the Mnuchin took the idea and sell the 20-year bonds. Remember, in the past, as you mentioned earlier, the government sold the 20-year bonds in the 1980s, but it only lasted 4 years because they run into the same problem as we run now. There's no sufficient demand for the 20-year bonds, and at that time, the government also have the limit of how much long-term bonds they can sell with. So at that time, the U.S. Treasury decided to just abandon the 20-year bonds in favor of keeping selling the 30-year bonds. 30-year bonds has more demand, at least it looks like now, that because a lot of the pensions, insurance company really like these long duration, long interest-sensitive security to match their balance sheet liability. So, yeah, so, here we are.
Why don't they, if it's more expensive selling the 20s, why doesn't the Treasury just not sell any and just auction off 10s and 30s?
Yeah, so the Treasury, in their debt management principle, they really want to make the debt issuance more predictable, more reliable. So once they start issuing new bonds, they want to see it stick for a while. Oh, so everyone have the same expectations. So you just can't turn it on and turn it off on a whim. So that's the argument for keep doing it. The other argument is that if we're looking down in the next few years, the deficit is going to continue grow very quickly, and they need every help from every part of the curve, since you have already this new instrument. So they like to stick with it. And also that the argument is that if you don't sell the 20-year bonds, you have to sell more 10 years, 30 years, then you're going to increase the cost for that part of the curve as well. So that's the counter argument.
Yeah. Are they issuing more front end or back end?
Yeah, so so there's some academic study, the most cost efficient way is sell in the middle of the curve, in the belly of the curve, like 5 years, 10 years. Anything beyond that, it costs a lot of money. But they also want a more diversified of a case. So if you sell, all of a sudden sell lots of the 10-year bonds in one auction, you could see that auction fared fairly poorly. And this is something they want to avoid. So that's the argument to just keep doing that, yeah.
These deficits they're becoming a thing here. Yeah. I mean, the annual deficit is almost $2 trillion. That's per year, kids. That's double the level of just 5 years ago.
Yeah. What
does your bond market say about that?
Yeah, that's a lot of debate on that. We saw that last summer, the long end of the curve really kind of keep rising. Remember at that time, the Fed was raising interest rates. So a lot of people were concerned that we don't have a sufficient demand for these bonds. And I think this is still the concern in the markets. There's talk of bond vigilante. It become a thing nowadays, that the idea that we are going to have a buyer strikes at all these auctions, because think about it. Some of the foreign investors, especially the central bank in China, Japan, they are not coming to the U.S. Treasury market anymore, and it's really the private sectors are buying all these bonds, and they're very price sensitive. They want to buy the price. They're not going to buy the price that's really low. They want to be compensated for the risks. So there's a term in the bond market called a term premium. This is how much actual compensation you wanted for holding the long-term bonds. And we see it backed up a little bit over the course of the year, but now there's recession concern in the market, especially over the last couple of days. That term premium is capped at bay at the moment, but at some point, has to be some confrontation between the markets and all the supply coming to the market.
At some point, totally. All right, Yeshe, thanks a lot, Yeshe. He's Bloomberg Markets reporter. Definitely check out everything that he writes because that's where I learn all my stuff. Just thank you very much for all your hard work and your writing.
The national debt, just for those keeping, tabs on it, as of August 1st, $35.1 trillion.
Yeah, but I remember 20 years ago that billboard near Times Square that had the billions and
yes, exactly.
Here's a fun one. Did you see this? The New York Times beats estimates on digital subscription increase.
Nice.
I mean, okay. Well, I didn't expect that to happen.
No, but I mean, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the FT are 3 success stories of migrating from, ink on paper to digital. That's the good news. The bad news is that's it.
Yeah.
So mom and, your papers in, middle America, not so much.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, the Boston Globe, one of the great newspapers of all time, no digital business to speak of.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, New York Times added 300,000 digital subscribers in the second quarter. They have almost 11 million total print and digital subscribers. So something to write home about on that one. All right, taking a look at the markets here. We are still up on the day. The S&P up 1.5%. Volume, though, a little bit light. This is Bloomberg. Happy Wednesday, everybody.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Disney reported weakness at its theme parks, offsetting its first ever profit in streaming. Brian Weiser, principal at Madison & Wall, says Disney should act like a tech company when it comes to streaming and focus on growth over profit.
If you want to build up to compete better globally with Netflix and Amazon, I think profits is something you got to focus on later on. They've got parks to fund profits. I think if you want to build a streaming business, you have to continue to invest in content programming and distribution.
Disney down 1%. CVS cutting its full-year profit outlook for a third straight quarter as healthcare expenses continue to soar. We get more from Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta.
They are saying they're launching about $2 billion in cost cuts. And traditionally, when we look at this market, cost cuts, efficiency, words like that can be a positive. But right now, the fact that they've cut their full-year guidance is not a good one.
And CVS down nearly 1%. Let's take a look at the travel industry, starting with Hilton. Second quarter earnings beat expectations. Its higher room count offset weak demand, but shares are lower. They're down about 1.5%. Online travel agency TripAdvisor down about 12%. It reported second quarter revenue that missed estimates. And Airbnb down 13%. Gave a disappointing outlook for a third quarter in a row, warning about slowing demand from vacationers. Its CEO Brian Chesky posting on X, quote, "I'm confident it's a good time to buy." And speaking of buying, e-commerce shoppers enjoying Shopify. Shares are higher, about 24% after second quarter revenue beat estimates. And online grocery retailer Instacart, well, they reported a sales beat. Their shares up about 4%. And finally, the weight loss drug market seeing more competition. That's having an impact on Novo Nordisk. It reported disappointing sales. Its weight loss treatment, Wegovy, ADRs right now checking in, down more than 6%. That is your company news at this hour. I'm Lisa Mateo.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. Happy rainy New York day. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business and finance and economics through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. We also like to keep you up to date with world and national news. And for that, we go to John Tucker. John?
All right, Paul and Alex, and that rain you mentioned, that's going to come back. Tropical storm Debbie expected to re-strengthen a little and turn north toward South Carolina coastline before its center makes a second landfall late today or early tomorrow. Now, Bloomberg's Rob Carolyn has the latest on this system.
Tropical storm Debbie is located about 60 miles to the southeast of Charleston, South Carolina. It is drifting to the east at 5 miles an hour. Top winds in the system around 45 miles an hour, but most of that is out over the open waters of the Atlantic. Debbie's in the process of converting from a tropical system into an ordinary low-pressure system. Again, the big problem with Debbie is going to be rain. There's been 15 inches of rain over parts of South Carolina, and another 5 to 10 inches likely to fall today as Debbie continues to slowly drift off to the east. I'm Rob Carolyn, Bloomberg Radio.
Democratic nominee Kamala Harris has introduced her new running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, at a rally in swing state Pennsylvania.
A leader who will help unite our nation and move us forward. A fighter for the middle class.
Governor Walz came out fighting against former President Donald Trump.
He froze in the face of the COVID crisis. He drove our economy into the ground. And make no mistake, violent crime was up under Donald Trump. That's not even counting the crimes he committed.
Well, the new Democratic ticket will hold rallies in Wisconsin and Michigan, with the United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain expected to join them at a stop in Detroit. And around 7 in 10 Americans say in the last year, extreme heat has had an impact on their electricity bills, ranging from minor to major. Most have seen at least a minor impact on their outdoor activities. This according to a new poll from the Associated Press. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Alex.
I was up to like $500 last month for electricity bills. This one I'm a little more worried about.
Really?
Yeah.
Don't you budget? Pay the same amount each month?
No, we did that last time. They don't do that this time. Last time. In our last apartment, like 10, 15 years ago, we did do that. We don't have that option right now or something like that.
Con Ed is your provider.
Con Ed? What other choice do we have in New York? Anyway, yeah, those bills are not the best. Okay, John Tucker, thank you very much. You might want to stay for this one because Paul might be getting kind of excited because 30-year mortgage rate tumbles to 6.55%. Biggest drop in 2 years. For those of you who don't know, I have a 2.75 30-year fix, which I like to talk about obsessively because it's
325
cool.
over here.
Okay, and Paul has a
6%.
6%. So if you get into the fives, are you?
I'm
A
still thinking
refi?
about it. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, so the question I have is, what's the clearing rate on mortgages that would get someone who is sitting on a 3 or 4% mortgage to get them to say, now I can finally move to Florida or move to wherever, because getting out of my 3 or 4% mortgage and getting into something with a 5 handle, not that bad.
Right. So basically, you're asking me and Tucker when we would actually
Yes.
consider. In
Yes.
theory, it'd have to have a 4 handle. What about you, Tuck?
Oh, no, there's no way. I'm just staying
It's
put.
not moving.
I'm not
Period.
going
Okay,
anywhere.
but
They're going to
let's play
bury
the
me in
game,
the basement.
But play the game. Like, if you were 30 and you wanted to, like, relocate, would it be in the 4s?
No. I've been spoiled by 3s, so somewhere
So
in the
he's sticking-
3s.
yeah. Okay.
Low
It's not
3s.
I mean, yeah, so mine would be 4, but the brokers probably don't care. They're just like, let's refi. Let's do something, guys.
exactly.
Let's do something.
Exactly.
I guess, though, I wonder if it prevents prices on homes from coming down if mortgage rates come down, and then if that messes up buyers and sellers.
I don't know. Just there's a lot of demand out there, and there's not a lot of supply. That's what we hear.
Yeah. All right. Let's look at the markets here, because the mortgage rate might be down, but nothing else seems to be. The S&P is still up by about 1.5%, and you have the Dow Jones up by over 1, Nasdaq up by about 2. We're going to get much more into these markets, plus talk more about real estate within the next hour. So stay with us for that. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to check in with Vince Signorella. He's a Bloomberg macro strategist. Get his thoughts on these crazy markets we've been experiencing over the last several days. Mandeep Singh, Bloomberg Intelligence tech analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Airbnb, Lyft, Uber, all those kinds of companies reporting earnings. We'll get Mandeep to break it down for us. Jonathan Palmer, senior healthcare analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence on CVS earnings, not CB as in boy, TV network. It's CV as in Victor.
Nice
I make that mistake all the time. So he's going to join us there and break it down. Lisa Nee, managing partner and head of real estate at Eisner Amper, get her thoughts on the state of commercial real estate in this country. Have we hit bottom? All right, let's kick everything off like we do in the 11 o'clock hour with Mr. Charlie Powell.
All right, I thank you very much, Paul Sweeney, and here's what's going on. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, day two solidly in the green, very close to session highs. S&P up 1.5% right now, 53.19, higher by 79 points. We've got the Dow up 434, up 1.1%. NASDAQ right now up 1.8%, surging another 295 points. Stocks climbing around the globe. Bonds fell after the Bank of Japan moved to reassure markets in the wake of historic volatility, sparked in part by Japan's unexpected rate hike last week. 10-year, 3.94%. The U.S. 2-year, 4.01%. As for spot gold, up 0.4% right now, $23.99 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude now up 2.9%, $75.30 for a barrel of WTI. So bottom line, stocks higher across the board. Alicia Levine is head of equities and capital markets advisory at BNY Wealth, and she told us it is time for the Fed to move.
I think the Fed is too tight here for where inflation is going, and real rates are quite high. So it's time. Gentlemen, it's time. It's time to start the cutting cycle, but we don't see evidence of a recession yet, and the soft landing is still in play here.
Alicia Levine of BNY. Disney out with a mixed picture as it reported third quarter results. Disney shares lower now by 1.5%. Airbnb, the big story today, and just in terms of earnings, Airbnb reported last night, shares today down now by 11.9%. Also, Super Microcomputer is plunging after reporting quarterly in revenue and profit that did miss analyst estimates. Right now, we do have shares of Super Micro. They are plunging by by 16.4%. Again, recapping stocks higher across the board right now. S&P up by 1.5%. The 10-year, 3.94%. That 2-year, by the way, cannot ignore that move, 4.01%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. So let's get you more on this market here. Charlie was just talking about super micro. So it's worth digging into that a little bit. And also kind of what does it tell us about where we are in the AI trade and what's happened over the last 4 days within the markets. Vince Signorella is joining us, Bloomberg Macro strategist. What do you make of the super micro, non-super micro move and sort of what that tells us about where we're headed?
Yeah, part of it's probably crypto as well, but I think, you know, you make a very, very good point about the whole AI trade. We've gone so far so fast. There was a point, you know, we spoke about this about a month or so ago, I think, where NVIDIA's market cap was larger than the entire stock markets of both France and Italy. You know, that no matter what you believe in AI or what it's going to do in the future, there's a tremendous CapEx build to get AI to where it needs to be really effective. There also needs to be a big build in CapEx infrastructure for electricity and energy to power the AI trade, which we just don't have right now. So I think in general, markets way ahead of themselves on where AI is going to be for us. You know, it's definitely going to be something positive, but it's not happening tomorrow. I mean, and it's not going to happen next year either. We've got a long way to go to get there, and a lot of money has to be spent to get the infrastructure and the companies' individual database investments in a proper place to make that happen.
Hey, Vince, explain to me what the yen carry trade is. All the cool kids are talking about it, and they're saying it's being unwound, and that's impacting the markets. Can you explain to, like, mere mortals like me what that means?
Yeah. So first of all, usually, historically, the carry trade involves a fixed income trade, not an equity trade. But about 10 years ago or so, there was a new investment created in Japan. I believe it was called NISA, which is a savings account to get the Japanese to save more for retirement. And what they did was they took that money, they sold their own currency, bought dollars, and invested in the U.S. stock market. And this is what apparently has gone on, and a large amount of that has gone into tech, obviously. So as the yen strengthened, that trade sort of unwinds. When you're losing money on the currency side of the trade, that reduces your profits on the stock side of the trade. And as you get closer to break even or even tip into the red, traders are bound to cut those positions and unwind the trade. And so what that is then you need to sell the stocks, convert your currency back into your local currency. And that what has done has lifted the dollar and pushed down the equity market. So right now we're sitting sort of right in the middle of things where for the carry trade to work, you need to get to mean reversion. And the average closing price for dollar yen for the year is about 150. So we need to get back above 150 dollar yen, 151, for this carry trade to reignite, to get people back started again. If we drop back below 146 or so, that could start the rout again, and we could see an unwind of equities once more.
I knew Vince was the person to go to.
Well, he's a recovering FX trader, so I hope he knows what the carry trade is.
I was just waiting for Vince, because I got all these other people trying to explain it to me. It doesn't work. Now I got it. Okay.
Now you got it.
Yeah.
So if we don't get to 151, do we expect then sort of a market rout, whether we're looking at treasuries or equities or elsewhere? Will that continue?
No, I think what we're going to see is a lot of volatility.
Okay.
Because you could easily see both sides of this sort of trade, the standard deviation downside around 145, 146. You could easily see 150 trade once again, bouncing back and forth. Who knows how often until a new trend is established. There has to be something to spark that. Could it be more tension in the Middle East? Could it be a ceasefire in the Middle East? Could it be the Fed capitulating at Jackson Hole in 2 weeks and giving the market a lift, as the BOJ did just recently? A lot of things to look at as to what can make that happen. But I think it's fair to say we're going to see a good deal of volatility over the next few weeks for sure.
All right. Hey, Vince, good to have you back. Appreciate it. Vince Signorella joining us, Bloomberg Macro Strategist. Let's get more to the equity moves. Lyft also moving in the market. Airbnb, though, just really struggling. Mandeep Singh, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Tech Industry Analyst, joins us on Airbnb. So is this Airbnb misjudging something, or is this just the U.S. consumer surprisingly slowing?
I think with Airbnb, the biggest concern has been the saturation in their core market. And, you know, we are coming off of pandemic where the tailwind was behind them in terms of people traveling more. But now everyone realizes that their room night growth is tapering off. And the reason why it's tapering off is because they are highly penetrated in their core markets, whether it's in the US, Europe. And with any marketplace business, you got to grow supply. If you're not growing supply, then it becomes a problem because then your demand is sort of limited by how much supply you can grow. So what they told us last night is they're going to spend more in terms of acquiring new supply outside their core markets in Latin America, in Asia Pac. And there will be ROI down the line, but for the next 2 to 3 quarters, they're going to be growing mid-single digit. And that's where I think when you're trading at 8-9 times sales, the highest valuation, you get this kind of response.
Alex, it's like we're surrounded here in our studio by these BI analysts. We got Mandeep, we got Jonathan Palmer on the healthcare.
I'm taking notes.
It's almost like there's not a management team in there keeping tabs on where all the analysts are for
because they're all here. We make them come here.
No, I think most of the analysts are on the beach at the moment. I mean, most of the management team. All right, so Mandeep, Airbnb, to me it feels like we're just kind of getting back to a new normal. I mean, if I like this story and I like the concept, I buy the stock on the weakness. What are some of the, are people concerned about the model per se, or are they just saying, hey, I just don't like the comps, I don't like the numbers I'm seeing?
Yeah, it's more about the estimates getting revised lower. Okay. So if you were hoping you will see upward revisions, that's not happening with this stock. And the reason that's the case is what they told us last night is, even though they are talking about new products, you know, rooms and experiences, nothing is adding in terms of the incremental top line growth or the margins. In fact, the margins would take a hit because they talked about expenses being on the higher side. So if you are looking for, you know, a next 1 to 2 year investment, there isn't a lot to look forward to in the Airbnb story. And plus, there is a cyclical element to this stock, given, you know, the economy is slowing down, consumer spending is slowing down. They have the best tailwind in terms of Olympics, you know, summer travel. Still, they guided to mid-single digit room night growth, so that wasn't conducive to investment.
Is the demand there still?
Demand?
That's the other side, right?
So if you look across the board in terms of how the marketplace, travel marketplaces have done, Booking, Uber, Lyft, every company has suggested that they are seeing some softness. Now, nobody is saying we are seeing recessionary trends, and when you know, people pare down in terms of their travel spend, maybe they're not going to take, you know, 3 vacations as opposed to they'll trade down and take 2. And, you know, same thing with type of Uber rides. They're not taking the most expensive. So there is that trading down that's happening right now, but nobody's calling for an outright recession yet.
Lyft. Is there any future for this company?
Can Lyft get a lift?
Can Lyft get a lift?
Oh, that was
like
tough. I'm sorry.
At all pumps.
I mean, scale is your friend when it comes to marketplaces, given how tough marketplace businesses are. And in Lyft's case, they need to partner with somebody who's rolling out autonomous vehicles, whether it's Waymo or Tesla. That's the hope. They need a part, or even in DoorDash.
That's not the place to be. Now, what's management saying? Are they open to a partnership?
They are. They said their fleet network is the best to roll out these autonomous and robo-taxis, but clearly, you know, we know Tesla's ambitions are they want to do it on their own. They don't want to use any of the intermediaries. So time will tell if Lyft will be partnering with them.
All right, that's amazing. I just can't believe how those two companies have diverged since their IPOs.
And it's reflected in the valuation.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
Look at Lyft's valuation.
I know, it's a monster. It's just a 10x in terms of market cap. Mandeep Singh, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Technology analyst. Somehow he covers all those marketplace things. I think it's all kind of a scam, but I don't know. People love the Airbnb. My kids use them all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So good for them. All right, let's switch gears. Keep on the earnings front, though. CVS Health, lowering earnings. This isn't the first time, I don't think. Jonathan Palmer joins us. He covers all those healthcare guys for Bloomberg Intelligence. CVS Health CVS Health Corp. This is a big company in the healthcare space, Jonathan. What's going on there?
Yeah, so this is the third consecutive downward revision to earnings, and it started with 4Q earnings, then 1Q, then 2Q, and really it all comes back to higher medical costs. That's the reason they're lowering or revising downward their earnings. And so if you think about CVS, there's three legs to the stool here. There's the Aetna business, which is their big insurer. There's a PBM, Caremark, and the pharmacy that we all think about. The pharmacy's stable. There's some pressure in consumer, kind of echoing a little bit of what Mandeep was saying. The PBM's doing pretty well, but the medical business, the benefits business, is seeing all these revisions downward as people are visiting their doctor more.
So basically, this is like if I own CVS Medical, I go to my doctor, I pay my $40 copay or whatever, and then they bill CVS for that.
Well, so the insurer, this is on the Medicare side, the Medicare Advantage plan.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot more seniors are visiting their doctors. And that trend, we saw it at the end of last year, and we thought it would maybe subside by the midpoint of this year. But it's still elevated going into the back half, and it's causing a lot of trouble for CVS.
But, sorry, no, I was going to say, but don't they get reimbursed by the government? Like, how does that work, though?
Well, so the way the plans work is they bid a certain amount, and then that's how they get paid. And so if the trend's higher, they don't make quite as much money based on what they bid initially on the plans.
So what can the company do to kind of
so there's a couple things they can do. They can exit markets. They can ratchet down the benefits that they're providing. So Medicare Advantage is a little bit different than traditional Medicare in that they can offer things like dental and vision. They can ratchet some of those extra benefits down. But it takes time because these are planned cycles. So like we won't see any benefit until next year.
This is like the whole issue with people living longer, right? Like you have people living longer, they're on Medicare, right? And then this is kind of what happens. How do we solve for this, though, long term? How does a company solve for this longer term?
Yeah, I think it's getting a better handle around the trends and how they price their offering. Interestingly enough, CVS just let go the executive who was in charge of this benefits unit, and the CEO and CFO are stepping in to run the day-to-day. So there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of wood to chop there.
And I'm just looking at the stock. What are investors saying here? Do investors, they want to wait around for this turnaround? I'm looking at the stock. It's down 26% year to date. Doesn't look like
Yeah, it's interesting. They didn't really trade down too much on the downward revision today. I think people expected it, and it's kind of the darkest before the dawn. I mean, there's not going to be really much of a turnaround here until we get into 2025. They've talked about some things they can do to up the margin in that Medicare business. They put in a $2 billion cost savings plan. These should help, restore some of the earnings power, but it's really on management's back to execute now against that plan.
Maybe a dumb question. Who are CVS's competitors, considering they're in so many businesses?
Well, on the pharmacy side, it's Walgreens, it's Walmart, it's Costco. On the PBM side, it's Cigna's Express Scripts, United Health's Optum, and then it's the whole smattering of insurers from Humana to United Health, Cigna, Elevance.
Political risk, Jonathan. I know your industry cares who's in the White House, who's in Congress. What's the feeling from the healthcare space?
Yeah, we generally, our regulatory analyst in Washington, Dwayne Wright, doesn't see too much risk through this election cycle. You know, everybody talks about drug prices. Biden put in the IRA. That's come to pass. There's a lot of saber rattling around PBMs, but usually nothing actually happens at the end of the day. It's more about the headline risk there. So we're not too worried about the regulatory landscape going into the election cycle.
What's the best part of your space? What's the name or the area that people are most enthused about?
Yeah, so on the healthcare technology side, there's a lot of interest there. You know, AI has kind of creeped into everything, and there was recently an IPO of a company called Tempus AI that does diagnostics and provides data to drug manufacturers. So they're kind of marrying those two data sets in a very interesting way.
Interesting stuff. All right, Jonathan, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Jonathan Palmer, Senior Healthcare Analyst over at Bloomberg Intelligence on CVS earnings, but also sort of breaking down all the healthcare systems. At some point, do you split up CVS? Is that a dumb question?
They just put it together. They just bought Aetna.
I know,
and nobody understood why. Jonathan came in and says, he doesn't know why they're putting it.
Okay, fair enough. So maybe too early to ask this question, but necessarily a question to be asked. Anyway, we will see, particularly when it comes to who gets into the White House and stuff. Novo Nordisk's earnings. Did you guys cover that earlier? That was quite interesting.
Yeah, no, we did not. But I mean, I guess the Wegovy, it's getting more competitive out there and just wait till they come out with the pill version. Then it's just going to explode because, I've been told by Sam Fazeli and the other smart folks at Bloomberg Intelligence Healthcare that, that's going to also reduce the side effects, which are real. So I think it's just going to make it so much more
accessible, basically.
Accessible, exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, lots more coming up on Bloomberg Intelligence. Lisa Nee is managing partner and head of real estate over at Eisner Amper. We're going to talk the state of the commercial real estate market. Lots of stuff going on there. I feel like day after day we're getting new stories about different buyouts or banks taking control of office buildings.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We're off session highs, but equities are extending their rebound as the panic that recently roiled the financial world subsides. Stocks are climbing. Bonds fell after the Bank of Japan moved to reassure markets in the wake of historic volatility sparked in part by Japan's unexpected rate hike last week. Here's where we stand. Again, off session highs, but the S&P holding above 5,300, up 70, up by 1.35%. The Dow up 350 points, up 0.9%. The Nasdaq Composite Index is up 265 now, up by 1.6%. The 10-year at 3.95%, with the 2-year 4.02%. Gold up $9 the ounce, up 0.4%. 2,400 even on the precious metal, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 3.4% now, 75.70 for a barrel of WTI. Lumen Technologies, based in Monroe, Louisiana, soaring today after full-year cash flow forecast from the telecommunications company beat consensus estimates. Lumen up now by 24%. And the cybersecurity company Fortinet is jumping after it forecast adjusted EPS that did beat estimates. Fortinet shares, they're up by 24.5%. Recapping, S&P up 1.3%. Stocks are rebounding for a second day. The 10-year 3.94%, the 2-year 4.02%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pello, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well, so you can see us. YouTube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast. All right, you know, commercial real estate, this is the way I frame it for everybody. 3rd Avenue, New York City, between Grand Central and our HQ here at 58th Street. When those buildings trade there, what are they going to trade at? I mean, what discount to the market? Bloomberg News did a great story on about a year ago saying that's really a risky area and it's emblematic of some of the problems in urban real estate. Lisa Nee joins us. She's a managing partner and head of real estate at Eisner Amper. I don't know, pick a building there, 750 3rd Avenue. When that thing trades, 10% discount, 20, 40, 50% discount, where is the market these days?
Yeah, hi, thank you for having me. So that's a really good question as to where the valuation sits and where people are willing to have the buyers and the sellers agree to that price. So 750 3rd Avenue.
Just to pick one out of the blue.
It wasn't my old office space.
Yes.
We currently moved. We're at 733 now, so it was our old space there. But looking at there and sort of looking, a Class A office building is going to trade differently than a B and C, and Manhattan's going to trade differently. So last year, if you would have had me here at this time, people weren't willing to make those price adjustments. And now, when you're looking at valuations, they're looking to make some adjustments. Now, how much of a decrease is really the key there. And looking at the leases in place too. Is it a long-term lease, short-term? And so the valuation is the key of what everything is going to be driving at. Now we finally have some buyers and sellers who are willing to bridge that gap, because the sellers are obviously waiting for the higher pricing. The buyers really want those deeper discounts that they're willing to do.
Do we have a market? Could you say, what I understand is Class A in New York or Boston or San Francisco is holding its value.
Correct.
And doing well. B and C, some of the discounts we're hearing, I'm hearing 50% plus.
Correct, and it's also how far are you along on that cycle? Where are you with your debt on that? And so, are the banks pressuring you? I mean, the banks at this point have been doing the pretend and extend, because they want to keep it on their balance sheet. Now they're looking at some of those B's and C's and looking to say, do we have to get those off our balance sheets? And they're pressuring the owners of the borrowers of the buildings to really go and do some due diligence and making sure to see how long they can last with those buildings and seeing if they really need to start getting those off their balance sheets. And so the banks are putting some pressure, regulatory reasons, I mean, the whole host of things, for those buyers to start looking and making some adjustments for the sellers.
We also saw, I think it was yesterday, I think Goldman Sachs took one of the big buildings in Times Square, and SL Green is going to be the property developer, but basically the guys who owned it defaulted on loans, and then banks had to take control of it. Are we going to see that over and over now, or is this going to be like a one-off?
So those are great headlines. That's what people want to read, is those headline stories. You're not going to read the portfolios that were able to work itself out through the news because no one cares. But those are happening. And so those behind-the-scenes stories are happening day after day.
How do they get worked out?
So the banks will work with the borrowers, and they'll put in some provisions in there for plans. They'll look at their rent rolls. They're making sure that they can make those payments and trying to make modifications within those debts to make sure that the borrowers really can make the properties work. The banks don't want to see those headlines on distress. I mean, the banks don't want to go out of business, so they really want to make sure that they're working. And if they can make the cash flow work, they are going to work to modify those debt instruments for the lenders, or for the borrowers, I should say.
You know, I have yet to have, or we have yet to have, because we focus on commercial real estate. Maybe we think about office too much, and we think about New York City, San Francisco office too much, because commercial is so much broader. But I want the person to come in here, maybe it's a family business, been in New York real estate for 150 years and said, we're done. We had B and C buildings on 3rd Avenue. and the banks are forcing us, and we're only getting 50 cents on the dollar. My 150-year family business is done.
Well, we never want that to happen, right? So we want to make
That's
sure
not
we're
happening,
working. It is not happening. Most of those are very lower. They're low leverage. People have been holding those buildings for a long time, and those are smart cash flowing assets. And so they've been working those assets for quite a long time. You're not going to see a flood of deals. You're not. You're going to see the here-off bigger deals that you're going to be able to read about in the paper. But the floods that people were waiting for with all the capital to come in and rescue hasn't happened yet. And have we hit the bottom? You know, I was away with a bunch of really, really smart owners and operators last week, and they couldn't agree if we've hit the bottom yet. And so it's just trying to figure that out.
So to that point, I guess it's a twofold question. One, why haven't we seen this flood of defaults like we were all kind of waiting for? And if we imply it's more on like a rolling basis where there's going to be these one-off buildings, et cetera, one-off deals, how long can that last for? Forever.
Great question. Wish I knew most of that, but again, it's part to deal with what the banks are willing to tolerate and how they can go in and do the modifications from a cash flow perspective. What people also are talking about is when you're looking to go in and purchase those deals and bring in the distressed capital, the distress isn't there, so it's really not as dire. And so really getting the people to understand what the valuations of those properties are and wanting to infuse capital to make those properties work. And so I think we're going to keep seeing the one-off for a little bit. Until we really hit that equilibrium where the buyers and the sellers can, and we're almost there, can start making some real meaningful trades.
What are the good stories out there in commercial real estate?
Oh, that's nice.
There's a lot of good, thank you. There's a lot of good stories. So industrial's doing really well. Data centers are hot. Hospitality has come back. Hotels, great. Yep. People are traveling and doing that. You know, maybe a little bit nervous about consumer spending, people with that fear and what's going to happen with the report that just came out. But hospitality industry is doing remarkably well considering where we were, you know, a few years ago. So there are some great stories and there's some great opportunities, but in every asset class, there's always a great opportunity for a great property with a really good vision. Why not take a great opportunity for that? So there are some exciting moments in commercial real estate.
So Paul has a 6% or over 6% mortgage rate, right? Yeah, straight up 6. So the big question is like, you know, when does he refi? And he's like in the 5s, he'll consider it. I'm guessing it has to be in the lower 5s for you to really consider it. What kind of Fed cutting cycle do we need for things to make a lot more sense in your world?
So we're all anticipating, we talked about this before the session, we're all anticipating about 50 basis points in September for the Fed to reduce. We saw an alarming what people wanted an emergency, which is not going to happen. Again, to do, the refinance is much different than the buyer market. So that refinance, I'm not sure Paul's going to get where he wants to go so quickly. But what should happen is that hopefully for people who are looking to sell, with the lowering of the interest rates, it'll make it a little bit easier for the buyers to come in and purchase those assets with respect to home building. Now remember, there's a lot more inventory now, believe it or not, than there were a year ago. With there's been a surge recently of used homes, which are the homes that we've all lived in, and the home builders are having a little bit more of an influx of inventory for new units. What's interesting though is there was a study done for the median home purchase. The disparity now between rental and that mortgage payment is still $1,300 a month. 10-year average was $300 to $400 a month. So we got to get that a little bit lower to be able to make a meaningful difference there.
So are banks lending, like if I'm in Poughkeepsie and I want to build a office park or maybe not an office park, probably like just a warehouse or something, will my local bank lend to me at reasonable terms?
The regulatory is making it harder. It's making it harder for them to go on their balance sheets and do it. Creative financing is a little bit more. So whether it's a debt fund, and even in the insurance companies aren't running to do those lends. Seller financing has really had an uptick in those types of projects. Again, that's land and you're building a warehouse. If you're renovating an existing, you might get seller financing. But the debt funds and some believe it or not, those families that we spoke about, they're looking to do some creative financing too for people in the real estate space. So it's going to be your debt might not look the way it had historically, but there is money out there for those investments.
All right, Lisa, really great stuff. Really appreciate that perspective. Please come back. Lisa Nee, managing partner and head of real estate over at Eisner Amper. And funnily enough, we got Brookfield coming up with earnings today. And just they were expecting deal activity to pick up now that central banks are going to be cutting interest rates, and that they think that there'll be some large-scale transactions that happen and they're able to exit some of their investments. But that's like a behemoth, and they're an asset manager. So that's a whole different kind of bag of chips.
I've seen them walk away from, some of the big names. Like, I would just think from a reputational perspective, I wouldn't walk away from a building. I'd take the loss like a professional.
Like a thing.
Yeah, but
like
I mean,
something.
I mean, I don't know. But I guess they're these big funds and they can do it.
I guess they do say that the real estate market it is improving. I guess the question is like how fast does it improve, and then where we kind of go from there. Anyway, great stuff. Thank you very much for joining us on that. All right, coming up, we're going to get the CFO take. Sagit Manor is joining us. He's the CFO of NYAX. It's ticker NYAX on the NASDAQ on company earnings. First of all, what is the company? That's really the question that we're going to be asking. It reported earnings today. That stock is up by about 5%. It is a financial services company. They do vending payment solutions. So John Tucker probably doesn't use them, but he's going to learn about it in just a moment. Here he is with world and national news. John?
I can't wait. Kamala Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, hitting the campaign trail in Philadelphia last night with the vice president going after her opponent's reputation.
I know Donald Trump's type.
Well, Tim Walz made his campaign trail debut, citing some of the areas where he feels Donald Trump falls short.
He froze in the face of the COVID crisis.
Well, the Harris campaign says it raised $20 million after she announced her running mate. A new poll from NPR, PBS News, and Marist College has Harris leading Donald Trump nationally 51% to 48%. Representative Cori Bush of Missouri, a prominent member of the Progressive Squad, defeated in her Democratic primary on Tuesday by local prosecutor Wesley Bell. The NTSB holding investigative hearings on the January 5th mid-air blowout aboard an Alaska Airlines flight. 20 hours of testimony continue as investigators sift through evidence to answer questions. Let's get more from Bloomberg's Amy Morris.
7 months after an almost new Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft lost that large fuselage panel during flight, safety investigators are conducting an extensive 2-day-long hearing to uncover any remaining mysteries surrounding that incident. Executives from Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems continue to face questions all day today from the NTSB. Yesterday, witnesses for Boeing and Spirit defended their company's safety systems and inspection practices. The NTSB says it has not yet determined who failed to securely fasten that panel. The hearings will last for a total of 20 hours, yesterday and today. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
And Israel's Olympic team says athletes have received death threats as they compete in Paris amid larger tensions over Palestinian deaths during the war in Gaza. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long. Here at Bloomberg, we got the S&P back above 5,300, 5,308 right now, up 68 points, higher by 1.3%. Stocks climbing around the world, extending a rebound as the panic that recently roiled the financial market subsided somewhat. Right now, we have got the Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by 375 points, up by about 1%. NASDAQ up 228 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain now of 1.4%. 10-year at 3.94%, the 2-year 4.02%. Spot gold up $4.50 the ounce, up 0.2%, while crude up 3.3%, 75.64 a barrel. Mortgage rates are down, falling the most in 2 years. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The average rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage dropped 27 basis points last week to 6.55%. Mortgage rates track U.S. government securities, and Treasury yields plunged after Friday's dismal jobs report fueled speculation the Fed will soon start easing. The Mortgage Bankers Association also reports the average rate in a 5-year adjustable mortgage dropped to 5.91%, this year's low. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And again, the 10-year, 3.94%. We do have Lyft shares down 11.2%, slumping the most in more than a year after the ride-hailing company posted second quarter bookings and issued an outlook that did fall short of Wall Street's expectations. Lyft, as I mentioned, down by 11%. Rival Uber up by 4.7%. Recapping, stocks are higher. S&P right now up by 1.3%. I'm Charlie Pellett, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellett, thank you so much. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business and finance and economics through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. We also love earnings. We love companies. We love to dig deep into some of the ones you may not have heard of. And for one of that is NYAX. It's ticker NYAX on the NASDAQ. It is classified as an other financial services. It's a vending payment solution company. The stock is up almost 5%. It reported earnings this morning. They reported a loss of about 8 cents a share on revenue of, as I go ahead and try and bring it up on my computer, on revenue about $78.1 million. The CFO joins us now. Sagit Manor joins us. Sagit, tell us more about your company. What do you guys do?
Good morning. So NYAX is the only global company in the unattended space. And what do I mean by that? You usually think about going into a store and paying with a cashier. We're exactly the outside of the store in the automated self-service. So think about as the vending machine, massage chair, as you might see in the JFK airport, a laundromat, EV charging stations and whatnot. We are, as I said, the only global company in that space, selling to more than 120 countries. We have 1.2 million devices around the world with 85,000 customers. And we are very happy with the positioning that we have today in order to, because this space is early stages. So very excited.
So, Saki, talk to us about your relationship with the EV business. How does your technology interface with the EV charging business?
So we are actually selling our product in 44 different verticals. I've mentioned the vending machine, massage chair, kiddie ride, laundromat, parking, as well as the EV charging stations, which it's a very interesting vertical, and we're very excited about the opportunity there. So if you think about today, there's rarely payment device on an electric vehicle charging station. So what's happened is a user needs to download an app in order to pay for the electricity. And what we see right now in all markets is we see regulation are changing. We saw that in California. We see that in Germany, in the UK, and many more states like that, where you have to have a device, a payment device on those machines. So we see retrofit, and we actually work with all of the electric vehicle charging manufacturers, and we have the only solution today to have a card-present solution, as we call it, being able to pay with your credit card in a station everywhere you go.
How easy would it be, though, to have that disrupted? Like if I just go to the gas station, I can use any credit card I want, payment system easy. How quickly could that part of your business be disrupted?
Well, it's a great opportunity for us, right? Because even today, when you think about gas station, some of it you have to go into the store in order to pay with a credit card. So that was one. Same, if you think about it, the same with electric vehicles, where instead of downloading an app, and by the way, sometimes you need 16 different apps because there's 16 different companies that allowing electric vehicle charging. So now you're going to be able, with the NIAX device, with our yellow NIAX device, to be able to pay with a credit card. So you have that opportunity. Users and people that have an electric vehicle, they have an anxiety if they need to drive, especially in the US where it's so big, if you don't have enough stations out there. So now think about the ability to pay with your credit card is changing the entire business.
Sagit, how do you differentiate your company versus others like Block or Toast that are out there in the payment business?
It's a great question. So if you think about Toast and Block and Square for that matter, they're inside the store. So there we will be, we call it the attended space, where you have a cashier in front of you. We are actually in the automated self-service, as I said, where you actually outside, there's no one in front of you. So this is one. We also have the end-to-end solution. So you have the device, you have the payment, and you have the software. And so what we are providing every customer that we have, and as I said, we have 85,000 customers. Most of them, by the way, are small businesses where they cannot allow themselves too much of a hassle. We are allowing them two things: enablement of payment and to manage their business better. What does it mean? Manage their employees, manage their inventory, really look at the transaction value and be able to see how they can manage their business better.
I see. What are you hearing from your customers right now? We talk a lot about the state of the economy. We talk about people, companies investing or not investing. What are you hearing from your clients?
So I'll give you an example. In Q2, $1.2 billion of transactions went through our devices. But when you look at the number of transactions that happened, it's 600 million. My point is, at the end of the day, in our business, it's a very small transaction value. The average transaction value for us, it's $2. And in that space, we don't see much of a change in the economy like maybe retail is seeing. We actually continue to grow. This quarter, we grew 39% quarter over quarter, with 47% increase on our recurring revenue. Our area, which is, again, the unattended space, is really in its early stage, and we don't really see any headwinds coming in. We haven't seen that for the last 4 years.
All right, Sagit, thank you so much for joining us. Sagit Manor, Chief Financial Officer for NIAX, the company, the electronic payments company here. You know, when you go to like the places and you self-serve, you get a sandwich, you get a drink, and maybe at an airport, tap your card and ask for a tip.
Yeah, what's up with that?
So
what do you do?
Out of zero. But now it's harder to do that when it's somebody standing behind the counter.
It is true. And also, if they're making you stuff.
Yeah, but that's a tough one, the whole tipping, when I'm old enough to be set in my ways and say, I've never done that for 50 plus years. Why would I start now?
It's a fair point.
For the young folks, they're being trained to tip for things that we were not trained.
But if you think of like Starbucks, like you guys work hard, drink orders are complicated.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Should I give $1? Yeah, it is a new thing.
It is a new thing.
But like somebody just ringing up my stuff at a store, I don't know about that one. That's a tough one. But then I feel torn, and then you feel guilt, and then like, should you do that? But
And then if you come from another part of the world where you don't tip, you're like, what?
What is that? Yeah. And I used to be a waitress, so I know the tipping feeling. So it's like I feel you. I want to do that for you. Anyway, okay, more coming up on Bloomberg Intelligence. Looking at the bond market here, guys. Take a look at this. We got a sell-off underway. You got a 2-year yields up by about 5 basis points. Same as the long end here. 4% is where we sit on the 2-year. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Airbnb shares plunging 13%, the most ever after the company issued yet another disappointing outlook and warned of slowing demand from U.S. vacationers. Bookings rose 8.7% in the second quarter to 125.1 million, falling well below analyst estimates. Airbnb also said it expects sequential moderation of growth in bookings in the third quarter, too. Again, Airbnb down now by 13%. Rivian Automotive has maintained its full-year vehicle production target and profit-making goal, but warned of a looming plant shutdown next year to prepare for a new vehicle launch. RJ Scaringe is Rivian's CEO. He spoke this morning with Bloomberg Television about the quarter.
There's a whole series of steps we're making along the way in terms of improving costs, but the biggest singular step that we've made is what we did in the second quarter. We took the plant down for about a month. Well, we made meaningful changes to the operations and importantly changed a significant portion of our supply base out to new suppliers in conjunction with a number of design improvements.
Rivian CEO RJ Scaringe, the stock right now lower by just about 2.5% among other EV makers. Tesla down 1.5%. Lucid up now by 2.4%. Lumen Technologies soaring after full-year free cash flow forecasts from the telecommunications company surpassed consensus estimates. The shares of Lumen up now by 28.7%. Both Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan upgraded their recommendations on the stock. And the cyber cybersecurity company Fortinet is jumping after it forecast adjusted earnings per share that beat estimates. Fortinet right now up by 26%. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Palatin. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. This is Bloomberg Intelligence. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from our Interactive Broker studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. You can also check us out on YouTube. All right, let's get you up to date now with world and national news. And for that, we go to John Tucker. John.
All right, Alex, the new Democratic ticket will hold rallies in Wisconsin and Michigan today, with the UAW president expected to join them at a stop in Detroit. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz took the stage together for the first time as running mates last night in Philadelphia. Walz gaining attention for deriding Trump, his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, and the policies they espouse is weird. Well, we asked Tina Fordham, founder and geopolitical strategist at Fordham Global Insight, about that kind of messaging.
Speaking from a political science point of view, it can be a very effective tool for marginalizing your opponent. There are those who would say that using humor or satire is childish. I don't agree. And also, it works a lot better than Biden's apocalyptic rhetoric, which really didn't move people.
That's Tina Fordham at Fordham Global Insight. Tropical storm Debbie swirling over coastal Georgia and Carolinas. Wide bands of rain swelling inland waterways before it slowly marches northward. The meandering storm has already drenched coastal cities in Georgia and South Carolina with more than a foot of rain. The forecasters warn 5 inches of additional rain could fall from South Carolina to Vermont through this weekend. Half a century ago, a French high-wire artist made Manhattan gasp.
I am holding the balancing pole in a South Tower ready to walk.
It was 50 years ago today that Philippe Petit ventured 1,300 feet to the top of the Twin Towers and took strolls on wire fastened between them this week in celebration of the anniversary. The now 74-year-old will be performing at a church in New York. And the fashion house Dolce & Gabbana has launched a new perfume for dogs called Fifi in honor of Domenico Dolce's poodle. Not all vets and pet owners agree it's safe or even appropriate. The perfume costs $108 for 3.4 ounces and has been certified suitable for animal use. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Alex and Paul.
All right, JT, thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right, the Olympics having a big impact on a lot of companies, including Air Canada, but not in a good way, apparently. Air Canada reported a 47% decline in quarterly profit, stung by softening demand in key markets, including France, which some travelers are avoiding this summer due to the Olympics. So while demand for flights to southern European countries like Italy, Greece, and Portugal has been strong, ticket sales for France and Germany haven't been as good. The CEO said during a conference call, Germany was the host country of Europe's football championships in June and July. So maybe some people are just trying to avoid the crowds.
That's interesting. I mean, usually you want to go there, but I guess maybe that's different.
People, I don't know. And also, I think the weather. So a couple friends of mine at the last minute said, we want to go to Europe this summer. And they just ruled out Southern Europe because of the heat. So they went to the Nordic countries, Italy, Sweden, Norway, and Copenhagen.
Isn't there like a thing for that? Like a, I want to say cold vacation, but it's not that because that's lame. But there's something specific that they're now calling it where you do go to the colder areas, even in winter breaks too, because it's not as cold necessarily as it had been in the past.
Yeah. So I mean, Air Canada is saying a sluggish European economy is a factor. Also, passenger revenue for Canada, U.S. and Pacific flights, also pretty strong there.
Stay home, people.
See, John, but people want to get out.
I mean, I'm staying home, and I gotta say, I'm starting to bug out a little bit on that. When is your Ireland trip?
Ireland is in the third week of September.
Okay, so that's coming up.
That's going to be the new Euro window for me because
fall.
Yeah, and it's just still decent weather everywhere. You know, crowds presumably are all back in school, back to their routines, and that'll be a good way to go.
I gotta say,
see the world.
being slave to a school calendar stinks.
Yep.
It just really does.
And
even
and
just
so
for one.
the Christmas break comes around, you got to pay the top money.
You can't. Like, there's literally no other way. Like, one day of school here, one day of school there. All right, well, that adds it up for me and Paul on this Wednesday. You're looking at a market here that is still on the upside, but we're off the highs of the session. The S&P is up by 1%. Balance of Power with Joe Matthew starts right now. Happy Wednesday, guys.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The campaign moves to the heartland. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the new Harris Walls Road Show rolls into Wisconsin and Michigan today, with J.D. Vance waiting in Detroit. Today we're going to get the view from the Republican side after our Democratic romp yesterday. Conversation coming up with Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, and with Lisa Camuso Miller, the former communications director at the RNC, as we try to get our arms around the evolving message from both sides of this race. And we'll have analysis from our political panel. Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor, partner at Stone Court Capital today, joined by Democratic strategist Janae Wartell at ARC Initiatives. So let's get with it. As always, we start on Wall Street. Look no further than our friend Charlie Pellet in New York for the latest on that. Charlie, what do you have?
Well, what I have is a little air coming out of the market, Joe Matthew. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, yes, all solidly in the green as the rally continues for a second day. We are well off session highs. Right to the numbers with the S&P up 51 right now, 52.91. We were trading above 5,300 a few minutes ago, up now by about 1%. The Dow holding on to a gain of 245 points, up 0.6%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is up 180, a gain for NASDAQ of 1.1%. We've got the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares higher by 0.4%. 10-year at 3.93% with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.02%, while spot gold is up 0.2%, $23.94 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude pushing higher by 3.3%. Stocks climbing around the globe after the Bank of Japan moved to reassure markets in the wake of historic volatility, sparked in part by Japan's unexpected rate hike last week. Now, as for the broader rate picture in the U.S., Ian Lingen is head of U.S. rate strategy at BMO Capital Markets. He was a guest this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance.
Our base case remains that if the Fed starts at 25 basis points a quarter, they can continue that cadence only if we remain in a soft, low landing environment. And we're going to know that over the course of the next 3 major data releases, 2 CPIs and that non-farm payrolls, and that will set the tone for September.
Ian Lingen of BMO Capital Markets. Shares of the Walt Disney Company are trading lower now, down 2.1%. Disney did give a mixed picture as it reported third quarter results this morning, with weakness at its famed theme parks offsetting its first ever profit in streaming. Again, Disney down now by 2%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 0.9%, 10-year 3.93%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington, busy as ever. Here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. We'll get back with Charlie a bit later on to have a sense of where the markets are taking us on this Wednesday edition of Balance of Power. Welcome to the middle of the week. You've not quite made it as far as you want to be yet. This has been another week in politics, with each day feeling like its own week. We do have a full ticket. We're going to be talking a lot more about the new roadshow, Harris Walls, with some interesting political minds coming up over the course of the next hour. Here's what we can tell you. They're crisscrossing in the Midwest. Harris and Walls in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, an event a couple of hours from now. They're going to be introduced by a dairy and grain farmer as they try to keep it real. No word yet if Tim Walz is going to be wearing camo. This evening, they go on to Detroit. There's a campaign event there, 7 o'clock. A first-time voter will introduce them. All the while, J.D. Vance, hot on their heels, matching the travel, as we told you. Already started, first in Detroit, like I said, crisscrossing. He was in Shelby Township, Michigan, then on the way to eastern Eau Claire later on, right around the time that Harris and Walz will be there. So the dueling road shows continue here. After the big moment last evening, were you with us? Special extended edition of Balance of Power. We thought it would never end. But of course, in a moment like this, why would we ever stop? Kamala Harris in Philadelphia. The big preamble, boy, was a who's who of politicians, Democrats from Pennsylvania. We saw Josh Shapiro bringing the crowd to its feet, Senator Bob Casey, even John Fetterman. I wonder if he met backstage at all with Josh Shapiro. And then the vice president herself, Kamala Harris, walks out with Tim Walz, who had his big moment in a crowd that was lapping it up. Here is the governor from Minnesota on his first day on the ticket.
Donald Trump's not fighting for you or your family. He never sat at that kitchen table like the one I grew up at, wondering how we were going to pay the bills. He sat at his country club up in Mar-a-Lago, wondering how he can cut taxes for his rich friends.
You can take my word for it. He got the crowd in a lather. Now, we spent a lot of time yesterday. Talked to Brad Howard. We talked to a number of Democratic strategists about this moment for the party, the way Democrats would be framing this new entrant to the race. And we want to get a better sense of the Republican messaging that we're seeing now. And as we've heard, dangerously liberal is how the Trump campaign is billing Tim Walz, along with, of course, Kamala Harris. But this is still evolving, and we're joined now by Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman from none other than Pennsylvania. He has a very good sense of the conversation that's going on right here, as also senior advisor of our Republican legacy. Charlie, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. Thanks for joining us. Is Tim Walz dangerously liberal?
No, I probably wouldn't describe him that way. I know Tim Walz. I know him well. I served with him. We traveled to Afghanistan together as members of Congress, Afghanistan and Iraq. He was very committed to veterans issues, defense issues, certainly agriculture. He represented a more, I'll say, a slightly Republican district. So he was fairly moderate as a member of the House. I think he's a bit more progressive as a governor. I think it's fair to say that Tim Walz is certainly more progressive than Josh Shapiro and Mark Kelly, but he's not a wild-eyed progressive either. Like Ilhan Omar and some of the others that you could think about. But so that's my quick take on it. And I think that in many respects, Republicans are breathing a sigh of relief that Kamala Harris did not select Josh Shapiro for a variety of reasons.
Well, that's interesting. Donald Trump this morning on Fox and Friends says he was delighted to learn that it's Tim Walz fulfilling the scenario that you're outlining here. Does Tim Walz actually make the job easier, or are we just giving way too much credit to the running mate on both sides?
Well, I think what you said is true, that most people really don't base their votes for president on the vice presidential selection. Tim Walz does no harm to the Democrats. And I think he'll probably be an effective attack dog for Kamala Harris. But does he really bring any additional votes to Pennsylvania? No, he doesn't. It doesn't bring any votes to Kamala Harris, as far as I can tell. Shapiro, of course, would have been a much more formidable opponent for Trump and Vance in Pennsylvania, because on the margins, I think Shapiro could have helped Harris considerably in the Philadelphia media market and on the margins. And this game is going to be won or lost on the margins. And so that's why I think Republicans are relieved, because Shapiro had a more centrist view of the world. And what's remarkable is, too, all the attacks against Josh Shapiro were coming from the far left. All they were doing was centering him and, frankly, her. But she chose not to. And plus, of course, Kamala Harris came out for a fracking ban in 2020, which is not going to help her, particularly in western Pennsylvania and other parts of northern Pennsylvania. Where natural gas is such a big part of the economy. And, of course, Pennsylvania is the second largest natural gas producing state in the nation after Texas. So, Republicans are breathing a sigh of relief. But I don't think Vance or Walz are going to make a determination on the outcome of this election. It's all about Donald Trump, and it's all about Kamala Harris at this point.
Yeah, fascinating. She did change her position on the fracking thing. I don't know if that matters or if anyone's listening in Pennsylvania. But give us a sense of what your home state is thinking here. Because part of the Democratic narrative yesterday, Congressman, was that Tim Walz might not be from Pennsylvania. He might not be able to deliver the electoral votes, but he can speak to Pennsylvania. That it's the personality, the character, the tone that will carry the ticket straight across the Rust Belt. Do you buy that?
Well, I think they may want to try to deploy Tim Walz in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. It may be in some areas where Democrats struggle, and thinking that he might be able to help them cut down on the margins. But as I said, I just don't think that the second fiddle is really going to determine the votes. I mean, Republicans are going to relentlessly attack this ticket of Harris Walz as being too liberal. They'll certainly go after Tim Walz on Minneapolis burning in 2020. But sure, they're going to try to deploy Tim Walz in areas that where Democrats may struggle a bit and they think they can cut down on the margins. I don't know how successful they will be. If you look at the map of Minnesota, where Tim Walz, how he performed in 2022, he and Joe Biden, I think, performed about the same in the same they won the same counties. And I keep looking back at Pennsylvania, and I look at Josh Shapiro won a lot of counties that Donald Trump did. And that's where I kept looking at this. Oh, this is all about crossover voters. So in my ruthlessly pragmatic political mind, I'm thinking, well, why would you just select a guy who can help you deliver the state that you must win? Pennsylvania is the whole ballgame for Kamala Harris. If she loses Pennsylvania, she loses the election. So I thought, oh, Shapiro's easy because he had a lot of crossover appeal. A lot of Trump voters voted for Shapiro. So I thought this was a pretty straightforward case, but that's not where we are. And I just don't think, like I said, Walz does no harm. He's a decent, he's an honorable man. He'll be an effective attacker for Harris. But I just don't see where he brings the additional votes that Harris didn't already have. Sure. That's like Vance. Vance doesn't bring anything either that Trump didn't already have. In fact, you can make a case that Vance is probably a bit of a liability to Trump at this point.
That's been the narrative recently as well. I'm just compelled by the two characterizations that we're seeing here. Maybe you can help me rationalize them. You know what Democrats say? He's a coach, right? He was a teacher, Army National Guardsman, became a congressman, rural. He's a hunter, right? We heard a lot about that yesterday. He's a sportsman. What we're hearing from Republicans is he turned his state into a trans refuge, that Minnesota was a sanctuary state for immigrants, that he wanted to give illegals driver's licenses. And by the way, while he's at it, the campaign manager for Donald Trump, Chris LaCivita, is now fanning the flames that he bailed on his military service, almost like a swift boat kind of a routine. Is any of that real? Should Democrats be acknowledging this?
Well, I think the attack on his service record is a fool's errand. I mean, he served honorably in the National Guard. They should leave it alone and just, thank him for his service. Yeah, look, if the Trump campaign has been fairly disciplined this time out of the gate. Of course, Donald Trump is not very disciplined, and he runs off on tangents. And I think the Trump campaign would be well served to keep this election focused on the issues on inflation, on the border, and even on crime. I think they can make a strong case against the Democrats. I don't think they need to get into these kinds of personal attacks. I mean, I saw something that suggests they were going to attack him on abortion. Oh, well, okay. Well, guess what? Walz and the Democrats are in a better place on abortion than the Republicans are. So I'm not sure that's an effective attack. Again, I'm not so sure that these attacks on transgender people are really going to be that effective either. I think they're much better talking about the economy, inflation, the border, and crime. But they need to be disciplined about it. Going off on these tangents and making wild accusations, criticizing his service record, and going after Kamala Harris and saying she turned black. This is absurd, and it's actually very damaging to the Republican effort. I think that's what most Republicans would.
It's great to have you back, sir, with The View from Pennsylvania, former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent on Bloomberg. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We'll keep tabs, of course, on both campaigns as they make their way through Wisconsin and Michigan today. Also want to keep tabs on the markets. To think it was just 3 days ago, we're talking about the end of the economic world here, a recession that's going to be hung around the necks of Democrats. We're still making up ground. I want to talk about it with Abigail Doolittle, who's been our market whisperer this week, Bloomberg Markets correspondent with us here. I see a lot of green. Abigail, are we to believe then this was just a carried trade trend? This had nothing to do with the U.S.?
Well, it certainly was a carry trade trend, but I would say it will still be a carry trade trend. We do have green on the screen today, but we're off the highs. The S&P 500 right now up about 0.8%. Earlier, it had been up well more than 1%. The NASDAQ 100 up 0.9%, also off the highs. The Dow trailing a little bit, down, up 0.6%. And all of this has to do with some of those big cap tech names. So let's connect that to the yen carry trade, because what I would say is that the strength we've had today and yesterday is a pause in the near-term downtrend, a pretty severe one. We basically have the bulls and the bears catching their breath, trying to figure out what's next. The bears overall look stronger. So in terms of that yen carry trade, you basically have had people all year borrowing cheap yen to then plow it into risk assets. That's one reason NVIDIA was up more than 180% year to date at its highs. Yes, it's very positive in terms of AI, their AI trends and their revenue, but you just had a lot of cheap money coming into the markets. It started to come out in early July, Joe, and with that we saw these indexes put in is right now a near-term peak. It could turn out to be a medium-term peak, but the Japanese yen, that's a haven asset. So something that's really interesting that I haven't heard too many people talk about is, why are people buying that yen? Why are they not continuing to use it as that carry trade?
Super microcomputer, I guess today gives us a little bit of a sense of what can happen with the AI trend here or movement throughout earnings season. I'm just curious more broadly, though, Abigail, how are we doing with S&P companies matching estimates or missing them?
I have not studied the percentages and the figures so closely, but it's basically, the last time I did look, I think it was 80% of the companies had essentially beat, but a lot of that represents companies managing estimates well. Today, interestingly though, there's a lot of earnings movers to the downside. CVS is down as they've slashed their outlook again, and they're talking about cost cutting. We have Novo Nordisk down sharply, down 7%. PBM squeezing their revenue on Wegovy. Pricing problems. We have super microcomputer, as you were mentioning, margins a problem there. So people looking past the big sales forecast. So it does seem to be somewhat idiosyncratic, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the Apples, the Nvidias, the Microsofts, only because that's such a big weighting of the to the indexes, and that goes right back to the liquidity situation again with that yen carry trade, and will it continue, or are we going to actually see that reverse? I think right now, again, a pause, and then we're going to see a selling in risk because that yen will continue to strengthen. And as far as that why, that haven why, there's just so much uncertainty right now.
Just lastly, we only have 30 seconds, Abigail. The oils are all up, including crude itself. You don't see that typically going into a recession, do you?
No, you don't see that going into a recession at all. And I think that that earlier this week, when there was a lot of recession talk on Monday, that was why markets were down Monday and Friday. I don't think that that's the case at all. Right now, the economy seems to be just fine. It's more this liquidity factor. People often like to ascribe the narrative, and sometimes it doesn't fit.
Sure. Stay close with us on this. We love talking to Abigail Doolittle, Eyes on the Markets, here on Balance of Power. Abigail, thank you. Bloomberg Markets correspondent, rounding things out as we head for a conversation with Lisa Camuso-Miller. More on the campaign from the eyes of the RNC next. This is Bloomberg.
12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. We're off session highs, but still a 51-point gain right now for the S&P at 52.91. Was trading above 5,300 last hour. Right now higher, holding on to a gain of 0.1%. The Dow up 239 points, up 0.6%, while NASDAQ is up 184, up by 1.1%. Stocks climbed around the globe. Bonds fell after the Bank of Japan moved to reassure markets. The 10-year yield 3.94% with a 2-year 4.02%. Gold up $4 the ounce, up 0.2%, 23.94. And West Texas Intermediate crude now up 3%, 75.40 for a barrel of WTI. Super microcomputer shares plunging by 16% after reporting quarterly revenue and profit that missed analyst estimates, outweighing an annual sales outlook that was billions above Wall Street projections. Recapping, S&P up 50, a gain of 1%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington, and once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, and good to have you with us here on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, on satellite radio, and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. YouTube, we'll save a seat for you here in the studio. You'll see our live stream as soon as you get there. A lot of people, I hear a lot of people are making a habit of it. Donald Trump's been hearing things too, casting about on Truth Social. As we were preparing to hear from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz last night, he writes, what are the chances? It's got to, anything that starts with what are the chances has got to be good. That crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the U.S., whose presidency was unconstitutionally stolen from him by, is it Kamabla he's calling? I don't even know what that is anymore. He's Kamabla? All right, fast forward. What are the chances he crashes the Democrat National Convention, he writes, and tries to take back the nomination, beginning with challenging me to another debate? I wonder what was for dinner last night or for lunch at Mar-a-Lago. Lisa Camuso-Miller is with us. I want her impression on this new ticket and exactly what's going to happen with the chances of a debate, not with Joe Biden, but with Kamala Harris. Lisa, are you hearing this too?
Hi,
Joe Biden wants back in? Hi.
No, I'm not. I think that that's a lot of wish casting on the side of the former president. I think he's wishing that maybe he could go back to the original ticket that he had to debate, because I think that he's in for a bit of a challenge when it comes to standing next to Kamala Harris on that debate stage.
Well, what are you thinking about the new ticket? We haven't had a chance to talk it out since certainly they appeared in public, or since it was just, my God, that was just yesterday? Oh my God, it was announced yesterday.
We've aged
I was
so
going to
much.
say it like a week ago.
12 hours.
Yeah. All right. So you've seen them in concept on paper. Now you've seen them on stage as well. And that was quite a rally for these two last night, the biggest crowd they've seen yet. Lisa, a lot of folks thought this was going to be Josh Shapiro. What do you make of the pick?
You know, if you'd asked me yesterday morning, I might have said that I thought that it was a bit of a ho-hum announcement. But boy, I watched that event yesterday with her announcement and announcing Governor Walz, and I was surprised and impressed with his approach. I felt like he really spoke to some of the issues that people are looking for guidance on, that are really looking for leadership on. And as much as I'm talking to my friends on the Republican side, I'm talking to a lot of political people in general that are starting to point out that perhaps that this has now become a race between the two bases. Because the issues, as much as Governor Walz really does have a point of view that sounds a lot like a Republican in some ways and manner, he also has been very much in favor of some progressive points of view that I think that the Republican ticket will now take and turn in a way to try to separate the two tickets in a base versus base contest. And I think that that's what we're going to see over the course of the next 90 days.
All right. This is really important. This is why we wanted Lisa to join us here, because you can paint him. I've heard this all over the last 24 hours, in some part right here at this desk, Lisa, that he's a moderate, or you can paint him as a dangerous liberal, another progressive, as we're hearing from Donald Trump. And there's quite a lineup here, right? Look at his record as governor. Minnesota, sanctuary state. a trans refuge, according to the AP. Menstrual sanitation products available in boys' bathrooms. Illegals getting driver's licenses. This makes a hell of a campaign ad, Lisa. That's what we're going to hear for the next couple of months.
Yes, and we've known this, Joe. You and I have talked about this a dozen times before. This is going to be the nastiest race, even more nasty now because the fight really comes down to that fight for the middle, that fight for who gets that coveted center right and center left voting block, and it's become so much more narrow than ever before. And so that just means that the base will definitely be with Harris, maybe more so than folks that were going to be with Joe Biden because they were concerned about his ability to lead at this late state in his life. But also, too, now the base is firmly behind Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And this, too, Joe, what I've said now over the course of the last couple of hours to folks is it becomes a popularity contest. Who is more likable and who is more perceived as the one who can work across the aisle to get things done? Because people, regardless of where they feel about progressive issues or conservative issues, in the middle is where the race will be won, and it'll be a race over a very, very narrow margin. And that's the one where folks can say who can work across the aisles, who can get the job done, and who also really brings the temperature back down in the U.S. because the temperature in terms of the dialogue, in terms of the fighting, the vitriol, is really so high that people are just exhausted and they're looking for some reprieve. And after watching last night, right now, if the race were between the two in a popularity contest in terms of who's more likable, it sure looks like the Democratic ticket is going to win over the Republican ticket if that were the foundation of what the folks are looking to vote for.
The Center for Effective Lawmaking ranked him the number seven most bipartisan member of the House during his final year in Congress. To your point, Lisa, but we're going to be hearing a lot about swift voting. And I'm curious where you see this going. Chris LaCivita, the co-campaign manager for Donald Trump, has been fanning the flames on this, and he knows a little bit about it, having done this to John Kerry. Remember Swift Vote Veterans for Truth?
Oh, sure do.
They're talking about how Tim Walz, quote unquote, bailed on his military service, that he quit the National Guard in 2005 to run for governor on the eve, essentially, of his being called up to deploy to Iraq. Is that a fair line of attack? Will we hear more about it?
Isn't that, Joe, not to interrupt, but isn't that rich? Because I know a lot of folks that served in Vietnam that are happy to talk about how Donald Trump was a draft dodger. So I don't think we have a lot of room to wiggle on this side. I don't think that that's one that's going to be a winnable point of view. They can talk about that swift vote all day long, but the truth is that he is a veteran and he has served in a way that the ticket on the Republican side has not. And that, to me, is a very tricky slope to go down, and it's one that I think will not necessarily work in their favor, because there are a lot of veterans that really feel like Donald Trump was not necessarily honest about his own ability to serve when time came for him to do that.
Yeah, picking through the talking points here with the person who used to run communications at the RNC. I want to ask you about this debate because everyone is looking forward to it happening. Until this morning, didn't really think it would. But Donald Trump got on Fox and Friends. You know, he gets on the phone. They let him go for like a half an hour. And, well, it sure sounds like there's going to be a debate now. Listen to what he said.
I don't know how she debates. I heard she's sort of a nasty person, but not a good debater. But we'll see, because we'll be debating her, I guess, in the pretty near future. It's going to be announced fairly soon, but we'll be debating her. I'd like to see it on Fox, by the way.
When he was asked what about ABC, he did the whole Slopolopoulos thing and insulted everybody there, but said, hey, takes two to tango. Sounds like the former president believes he needs to debate Kamala Harris, Lisa. What do you think?
You know, I'll believe it when I see it, Joe. I think anybody in that camp would know that she is a very skilled debater. She was a litigator. She was an attorney general. She did very well in the debates, even on the Democratic side. She has been coached, and she herself is very disciplined in the way that she responds and reacts. I mean, the last time we saw Donald Trump on stage, he was very much offensive to everyone in the audience. And I suspect that unless they're very careful about the way he debates a woman, it's really going to be one of those things that will be jarring and very much not helpful to his campaign. Calling a female nasty is just plain wrong and just plain... it smacks in the face of the way that Donald Trump has carefully and not so carefully conducted himself when he's in a debate with someone that doesn't look exactly like him. And that, I think, is one that he absolutely needs to be very careful about. In his campaign, I'm sure, with the talent that's in that room, they are doing the same. They are very cautious and very thoughtful about how that's going to look.
I'll be very curious to hear the nickname that he settles on for Tim Walz. Big picture, Lisa, with your Republican hat on, does this not make it easier for the Trump-Vance ticket than it would have been with Josh Shapiro as a running mate?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think Governor Shapiro definitely was a pick that folks thought was one that made good political sense. I'm sure that the friends of mine who are in the polling world would tell me that it doesn't necessarily make a difference. But I do think, though, the fact that Governor Walz has this credibility in middle America and has definitely got the bona fides. The debate to me that is going to be most interesting to watch is the one that we're going to see between the two vice presidential candidates. So as much as I like to think that this pick is one that gives a little bit more of an advantage to the Republican ticket than one with Governor Shapiro, I also think that 90 days, as much as you and I know, could go very quickly. It's also the kind of thing that a lot of mischief and a lot of pitfalls are before us before we get done.
Just think of what we're going to go through together for the next 90 days. Let's see if there is a vice presidential debate. I sure hope so, Lisa. It's great to have you back. Lisa Camuso-Miller with an extended conversation. I was looking forward to that. Former RNC Communications Director and, of course, host of the Friday Reporter podcast and a dear friend of the program. Speaking of friends, we've got our political panel up next. Rick Davis is going to join us. Coming up, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor, joined today by Janae Wortel at ARC Initiatives. Now that it's on, we're heading for the Midwest, a brand new ticket. Well, I guess technically two brand new tickets as we make our way to Chicago. Much more on that ahead on Balance of Power after we check world and national news. Amy Morris covers that for us in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom right here in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Vice President Kamala Harris, as you mentioned, stepping up those efforts to bring in rank-and-file union members in swing states back to the Democratic fold, this time with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. After holding their first rally in Pennsylvania, that ticket is now kicking off a battleground state blitz. It starts today in the blue wall states of Wisconsin and Michigan. Bloomberg White House reporter Josh Wingrove.
We'll get that one-week tour. Whether Joe Biden hits the campaign trail remains an open question. There's some reporting that they're kicking tires on that. But, of course, all this is heading up to that convention later this month in Chicago, which will really be a coronation. This momentum, you'd expect, will continue to carry Harris in the polls.
Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove. The National Transportation Safety Board is hearing more testimony today in the second day of hearings into potentially inadequate manufacturing standards at Boeing. The board is hearing testimony and sifting through evidence following that blowout of a panel of fuselage on an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 MAX 9 happened back in January. Costco, Walmart, Kroger, Albertson, McKesson all receiving threats and warnings from faith-based investors to not sell the abortion pill mifepristone. A group led by Inspire Investing sent letters to the companies saying they risk reputation and legal repercussions. And at last count, the U.S. has the most medals in the Summer Games in Paris with 87. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. Equities continue to push higher. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing, with the S&P at 5286, was trading above 5,300 earlier in the session. Right now up 45 points on the S&P, a gain of about 0.9%. The Dow up 212, up by 0.6%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 167 points, a gain now of 1%. The Russell 2000 higher by just about 0.3%. The 10-year at 3.93%, with the 2-year yielding 4.01%. Spot gold up $4 the ounce, up 0.2%, $23.95 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 3%, $75.44 for a barrel of WTI. Stocks higher, bonds fell after the Bank of Japan moved to reassure markets in the wake of historic volatility, sparked in part by Japan's unexpected rate hike last week. Right now, we have got the S&P, as I mentioned, up by 1%. What about a slowing economy in the U.S. and how that is playing out with the Federal Reserve? Brian Levitt is global market strategist at Invesco.
You have to be careful what you wish for. When we were sitting here with 9.6% inflation rate, the concern was that the consumer was just not slowing down, and we were booking Airbnbs and we were going to the parks and Disney because we hadn't done anything in a few years. We had saved some money and we wanted to enjoy some experiences. So we can't have it both ways.
Brian Levitt of Invesco. He mentioned Disney. Disney out with a mixed picture as it reported third quarter results this morning. Weakness at its theme parks offsetting its first ever profit in streaming. Disney shares, though, down now by 2.7%. He also mentioned Airbnb. That stock plunging by the most ever after it issued yet another disappointing outlook and warned of slowing demand from vacationers. Airbnb down now by 13.2%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 48, a gain of 0.9%. Balance of Power, the Wednesday edition, continues in Washington. Back we go once again, your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, always part of our program here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, where we invite you to join us every day here on the fastest show in politics. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. Simple as that. You'll find our live stream, and we always welcome you here in the studio. Look no further than Eau Claire, Wisconsin, to have a sense of where the campaign is headed today. Closer to Minneapolis than it is Milwaukee, that is where we will find, a couple of hours from now, Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and a man named J.D. Vance. Separate events, of course. But the new roadshow continues here on the Democratic side of the ticket. We saw, of course, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in Philadelphia, brought you special coverage last evening here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And now the roadshow begins. As we mentioned, 7 cities in 5 days, and J.D. Vance is stalking them. Already spoke earlier in Detroit. That's where they're going to go later on today, to Michigan. Remember, this was the Rust Belt whisperer in Tim Walz. Nancy Pelosi, of course, one of the great forces of nature that helped to push Joe Biden out of this race, spoke earlier on NBC about the veracity of this pick. The governor of Minnesota, here's the former speaker.
Well, I think he helps across the board, but being from the Midwest and the heartland of America, I think he brings the heartland values, not that they aren't values that we all share, but as are perceived by the heartland to the debate, and that's useful every place in the country. But works there, works almost everywhere.
Speaker Emerita, to be clear. What are heartland values? Remember the whole flap over New York values? Donald Trump seized on that just a couple of campaigns ago. And I wonder if we're going to go down that same road. As we assemble our panel now for their take, now that we've seen them in the act, it's different than hearing about it and reading about it on paper. Rick Davis, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, and partner at Stone Court Capital, is with us. Joined today by Janae Wartell. She's back, Democratic strategist, partner at ARC Initiatives. It's great to see you both. Janae, are you one of the many Democrats excited by this? It was remarkable yesterday to watch the evolution of people kind of saying, huh? When they learned about it in the morning, to fist bumping in the air by the time they saw him on stage in Philadelphia. How about you?
Well, I am definitely one of the folks who is really excited about this ticket. I'm really excited about the pick of Governor Walz for this ticket. I think that was really solidified when you saw them on stage yesterday, really seeing that energy. Obviously, Vice President Harris has brought a tremendous energy in her candidacy, but really just seeing that supercharged gives Democrats the advantage. As it was mentioned, the wind is really at their back with this new ticket. And I think you're going to see throughout this tour that they're taking through battleground states that they're going to really deliver a clear message to America, to voters in these key swing states, and really draw the contrast between a Harris-Walz ticket and a Trump-Vance ticket. I think that contrast is really going to be clear and it's going to be on full display.
Rick, Republicans say they just got it easier with Tim Walz on the ticket, that Donald Trump was much more concerned about running against a Harris-Shapiro ticket, that he's dangerously liberal, that he ran a sanctuary state, that he supports trans, that he's giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. Are they right?
Yeah, I mean, my own view is they're probably more right than wrong, and a lot of the reporting we've learned is that they were using every resource they could to go after Shapiro, and try to make it as hard as it could be to pick him, sort of playing the ref in that regard. So, yeah, I think it's like what Charlie Dent said earlier in the broadcast. When you've got a guy who picked up Trump counties in Trump precincts in Pennsylvania, the state you have to win if you want to be president of the United States, if you're Kamala Harris. I just don't get the appeal that Governor Walz has over that. To me, that's a nuclear weapon in politics. You want to use it. But it is what it is. I think, it's a bow to the base. I would have thought after the J.D. Vance pick, which was also a bow to the base, that the Harris campaign would have seen an opening in the middle and would have wanted somebody who appealed to, more the ex-burbs than rural America, because the reality is they're losing in rural America and they need to win those suburbs and ex-burbs. So, I think he's a perfectly great guy. I don't disagree with anything I've heard. Republicans were going to attack whoever she picked, so that doesn't really make any difference. But I just didn't think it was particularly strategic.
What do you make of that, Janae? I just want to give you a chance to react to that, because that has been the narrative. In fact, Donald Trump was back on Fox and Friends this morning talking about the fact that this is driven by anti-Semitism to not pick Josh Shapiro. I know a lot of people were upset about that line of criticism. We heard it from J.D. Vance yesterday as well. Donald Trump suggesting that Democrats don't like Jews or Israel, despite the fact that the vice president is married to a Jewish man.
Well, it's no secret that whatever the pick, whatever the pairing was going to be of Vice President Harris and whomever she chose as her vice president, they were going to find baseless attacks to launch against them. And so it's no secret that they're pulling out every insult that they can find. But the reality of the matter is that even though Governor Shapiro is not going to appear on the ticket next to Vice President Harris, he's still going to be a really fierce surrogate. You saw his fiery speech yesterday and giving remarks at the rally. And you really saw that even though he won't be on the ticket, you're going to see him really step forward in a very prominent way to be a key surrogate for the ticket. I mean, you look at Governor Walz, you look at his record, you look at how he's delivered for everyday families, how he kind of speaks to this folksiness of the Midwest. And you really do see that he is a great pick. He is a great complement to Vice President Harris and her background and kind of what she brings to the conversation. So I think you're going to see him be able to travel across the Midwest. You're going to see him go, you're going to see him go to Michigan. You're going to see him to go to Wisconsin. You're going to see him go to states where that blue wall needs to be solidified, where Democrats need to perform very well. So I definitely can see the appeal and the strategy of Governor Walz as a pick.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, the potency that the Israel issue has on the Democratic side of the aisle, and I'm connecting the dots here to what we saw last evening in Missouri primary. And a second member of the squad dispatched here in a primary contest. This time it was Representative Cori Bush. If you've been following this, probably not a real big surprise, but Wesley Bell did win that Democratic primary, and a lot of it had to do with Israel. As we saw with the race against Jamal Bowman, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, dumped a bundle of money. It was over $9 million in this congressional district to try to unseat Cori Bush, who's been critical of Democrats' policies, the Biden policy in Israel. Rick, how are you reading the tea leaves on this for November?
Money matters. When you get unloaded like AIPAC did on a candidate like Bush, I mean, there's just no surviving it. I think $12 million spent on that congressional race by an outside group, and Bell had already beat her cash on hand 4-1. So it was just overwhelming. And look, I mean, Israel's on the ballot. There's no question that support for the war in Israel is only going to be more intense and more necessary because it's not going to get better. I think there was some thought at the early summer that, gosh, maybe all this we get a ceasefire and nobody will even care about this by September. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. We now see potentially the war broadening out into Beirut and Lebanon. Hezbollah is engaged in a way that is pretty aggressive. And they don't have a deal yet on ceasefire with Hamas. So, I mean, there's no question Israel will play a prominent role in the discussion. And it's going to be interesting to see whether or not Harris decides to take the Biden track on this, which was generally unpopular in her own party, and whether she uses this moment to tack to a different location, whatever it may be, just to create her own independence on this issue.
It's really interesting there, Janae. What do you think about this? What will be the message from Kamala Harris when it comes to Israel? A lot of folks assume that she will be harder on Benjamin Netanyahu than Joe Biden. Should we assume that?
Yes, I mean, you can see in the days following her kind of becoming the top of the ticket candidate that she's really kind of taken a different approach to Netanyahu and to Israel policy. And I think you're going to see more as her position and as kind of her policy starts to become kind of front and center, shifting from Joe Biden and his policy to, what she would do as president. I think you're going to see some changes there. So I think there's more to be seen than we've seen so far. But the reality of the matter is, anytime an election, is flooded with money, especially when there's a primary, that's going to matter. That's going to have tremendous influence, whether the influence is negative or the influence is positive. You're going to see that be a driver. And I think that's what we saw in that primary in Missouri. But, make no mistake about it, voters are going to vote on the issues. If Israel is a prominent, important issue, if the war in Gaza is a prominent, important issue, it's going to be really important for them to have that conversation. But also there are a totality of issues that voters are concerned about this election cycle. So you're going to definitely see this being one of many. So I think there's more to be seen than we have seen on Vice President Harris's policy on Israel. So we should stay tuned.
Just a minute left here, Rick. We know the deficit that Joe Biden was facing in states like Michigan, where obviously the Muslim American, Arab American community is an important part of the voting bloc. Looking at past elections in Michigan, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will be in Detroit later today. Do they talk about this?
I'd be surprised if they do. I mean, the reality is, even though there was some pressure with that demographic in Michigan when Biden was top of the ticket, it was the most competitive state he had in the blue wall. So there was no real tangible result. And look, the base has come home for Kamala Harris. She should be very satisfied that what Democratic strategists have been saying for a year is the base will come home, the base will come home. It's home. It just didn't come home to Joe Biden. It came to her. And I don't see that being any different in Michigan than it's going to be in any other state. But why poke the tiger? You go into Michigan, as you point out, Joe, lots of Arab Americans voting there. Why bring it up at all? Talk jobs, talk the economy, talk the top of the top of the issues that voters care most about. She's doing better on the economy than Biden was, and if I had a goal, I'd say be number one on the economy.
About that. And by the looks of things in the stock market, there'll be fewer questions about that, at least in the immediate term. Rick Davis and Janae Wartell, great panel with more to follow. They'll be with us in our second hour, of course, here on Balance of Power. Thank you both for the insights today on Bloomberg. Much more ahead. We'll spend some time with Bloomberg's Adriana Lowenkron as the campaigns hit the heartland. And Charlie Cook is going to be with us from the Cook Political Report now that we've had a chance for at least a couple of hours to digest this new ticket and get a sense of where it's all going. Kaylee Lyons is on the way in next. So get your popcorn ready. Get on YouTube. Hour 2 is on the way. I'm
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Dueling campaigns hit the Rust Belt. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the new Harris Walls Road show rolls through Wisconsin and Michigan today, the same day J.D. Vance visits the same two states. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Thanks for being with us, Kaylee. The race to identify each other is officially on.
Yeah, and it is not a coincidence that each will be attempting at that identification within the same swing states that ultimately could play a role in deciding the election today. And something else that could play a role is the labor vote. And that is what, in part, today is about for the Harris-Walz ticket, as they've gotten endorsements from many in labor, including the UAW. And it's the UAW workers that they will be rallying with in Detroit this evening.
That's right. Workers who rank and file, at least in many cases, have gone for Trump as Kamala Harris tries to follow up on Joe Biden's message of being the most union-friendly administration, I guess, in waiting. We'll see how that resonates today with a running mate at her side.
Yeah, of course, one that was part of a union himself as a former teacher. That is part of the resume of Governor Tim Walz. But other parts of his resume, including his record as governor, are already drawing attacks from the other side of the aisle when it comes to some of the more progressive policies that he has enacted into law in his state.
Yeah, we're going to hash out some of this with Charlie Cook a little bit later on from the Cook Political Report. The framing that we're seeing on each side, is it the coach, the teacher, the member of the National Guard, or is it the man who ran a sanctuary state? That's what we're going to be hearing about for the coming weeks.
Indeed. And we'll have, of course, more coverage throughout this hour and later on today on Bloomberg TV and radio. But first, as always, let's get a check on the markets. Charlie Pellet has that for us up in New York. Hey,
Thank you very much, Kaylee Lyons. Indeed, higher right now across the board. However, we have just seen the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares turn negative, down now by about 0.1%. To be sure, stocks have been losing a fair amount of steam, well off session highs right now. But again, to be clear, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they remain in the green. S&P up 27 right now, up by about 0.5%. The Dow up 101 at 39,099, up by about 0.3%. NASDAQ up by 0.6%. As I mentioned, the Russell 2000 down now by 0.1%. 10-year at 3.92% with the 2-year 4.01%. Spot gold up 0.3%, 23.98 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 2.5%, 75.06 for a barrel of WTI. Stocks climbing around the world after the Bank of Japan moved to reassure markets in the wake of historic volatility sparked in part by Japan's unexpected rate hike. Right now, we have got the S&P again up 0.5%, your 10-year 3.92%. Disney out with a mixed picture as it reported third quarter results. Weakness at its famed theme parks offsetting its first ever profit in streaming. Disney shares down 3.1%. Airbnb plunging by the most ever after the company issued yet another disappointing outlook and warned of slowing demand from U.S. vacationers. Shares of Airbnb down now by 13.8%. So again, recapping here, S&P 500 index up 23, a gain of 0.4%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, Kaylee Lyons and Joe Matthew in Washington, and the newly minted Democratic ticket on the road somewhere in the skies on the way to Wisconsin and, of course, later Michigan today. But yesterday, they launched the Harris-Walz campaign officially in Philadelphia at a rally at Temple University, which drew some 10,000 people. We brought coverage of that for you live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. You could hear often the exuberance in the room as both the current Vice President Kamala Harris and the man that she would like to serve as her Vice President Tim Walz spoke. Here's a little taste of what Harris told the assembled crowd.
We got some work to do. We need to move to the general election and win that. And to all the friends, listen, we also need to level set. We are the underdogs in this race, but we have the momentum, and I know exactly what we are up against.
Kamala Harris with her new running mate at her side in Philadelphia late yesterday. As Kaylee mentioned, we brought you special coverage of what turned out to be a pretty long event there for the two and the grand unveiling. And that's where we start our conversation right now with Adriana Lowenkron, reporting on the campaign for Bloomberg, has endured many of these rallies and has many more booked. Adriana, it's great to see you. When we consider, I hate to do this every time you come in here, but the amount of stuff that has happened and that you've witnessed firsthand, and I guess the last 3 weeks now since the attempted assassination, is just remarkable. It's going to take us a long time, I feel like, to unpack this, to rebuild it in our heads and really figure out what happened. But you're tasked with writing the first draft of history here. And you've got a new campaign that is bringing an enormous amount of enthusiasm that I'm guessing you were not seeing at Joe Biden events before.
Absolutely. I mean, I was at the Harris rally. It was the first one since she had gotten the pledged number of delegates to be the presumptive Democratic nominee, and the atmosphere was definitely different. Everyone is saying the vibe is shifting. That's apparently the terms we're using. But essentially, you know, and I speak to voters everywhere I go, whether it's Trump, it's Biden, it's Harris, and these are people who are now excited because it's not just they're voting against someone, it's they're voting for someone. And this is something that I think even everyone was kind of wondering about. Would the Democratic Party coalesce behind one person? Would there be more division until we finally get maybe even all the way up to the convention? And so having someone that the party is rallying around, having now a new VP whom the party is rallying around, you're definitely feeling that in the air.
Well, but there's something to be said about a honeymoon period or a sugar rush, if you will. Adriana, this is all incredibly new. We're talking a campaign that's just over 2 weeks old. How do they sustain this momentum? What's the plan?
Absolutely. And as you said, it's a great honeymoon. Let's just start with that. I mean, they're bringing in a lot. I think it's now 36 million or something since Walz was on the ticket. Even before that, the fundraising has eclipsed Trump, where before we saw what was an advantage for Biden. Actually, now the Trump campaign was going beyond that. Now we're seeing the tables turn and the polling turns. But I think what's important now is it's not just the money that's coming in, but it's really looking at the map. And so having Harris now at the top of the ticket, having Walz who brings in kind of the Midwestern appeal, there are way more states in play. And so, again, we're looking at these swing states, both, Vance on the Trump campaign and Harris. They're going on these swing state tours, and we're really going to see how they're able to appeal to all of the different voters here.
What's Donald Trump's schedule look like right now? Because I find it interesting that you've got Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. You've got the full ticket going to Eau Claire today, going to Detroit today. J.D. Vance is doing a solo tour across the Midwest right now. Without the top of the ticket with him. Doesn't everyone want to see Donald Trump? What's that all about?
Right. I mean, Trump is definitely down a bit this week. I'm going to be with him in Montana on Friday, which is not the most traditional place that you would think, but there is, of course, a competitive congressional race going on there, and we'll likely see him touch on that. But I think he's kind of giving Vance this opportunity to shine. I think also the way it kind of lines up with Walz, being introduced to the Democratic ticket. Now the attention is kind of on both of them. And usually, I have people telling me, oh, VPs don't really have too much of an impact. But I think everyone is still looking at them. They kind of know Trump already. They know Harris in the sense of they know her as VP. Obviously, she has to figure out how she's going to separate from Biden, or the opposite of that. There's kind of a tricky balance there. But in terms of these two VPs, they're relatively new generally to the public. And so this is kind of their chance, and there's definitely a test. We know Vance has come under fire for some comments as of late. We may see the same with Walz. Things may be, come up. This is the time this is their introduction, let's say.
Well, it's not just J.D. Vance who has come under fire for comments. You were at the NABJ conference where Donald Trump openly questioned Harris's racial identity and was very combative with the journalists who were moderating him at that event. There has been, throughout this campaign, this narrative that the Trump campaign is more disciplined this time. The campaign, though, is one thing. The candidate is something else. Is there a sense that Donald Trump is going to get more disciplined with the messaging?
That's a good question. I think we definitely saw a bit more discipline. I'm thinking specifically in the wake of all of the fury over Biden and the age and whether he should step down. He was kind of quiet. He actually was pretty disciplined then. We didn't really hear from him. He kind of let Biden have all of the negative news coverage. But now we're seeing things change. We're seeing Harris come up. There's a lot of enthusiasm. A lot of the earned media is going towards her. And I think he is now kind of back in the situation where he's trying to go on the offense. And so he's been testing out a bunch of different things. As you know, NABJ is an example of something that did it stick? Maybe not. Did it help kind of bring in the black voters that he needs? Maybe not. And so we're going to continue to see, obviously, some of the cities that Vance was in Philadelphia too. Trump had been to Philadelphia. These are cities that they need. They need the black population. But again, you have Harris. Harris was just in Atlanta. She's bringing in the goods, as you may say, with Meg Thee Stallion and all of these other rappers. In Philly, there was a DJ. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of just the juxtaposition between the two and who they're trying to attract.
And of course, you'll be there to cover it all for us. Adriana Lowenkron, busy girl for Bloomberg these days. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us. And as we assess, actually, to Adriana's point, what impact, if at all, a vice presidential selection in Governor Walz actually will have on this campaign. We turn now to Charlie Cook. He, of course, is founder and contributor to the Cook Political Report. Charlie, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio. It's always good to have you. We made a very big deal about this yesterday. Obviously, there was quite an introduction of Walz as the vice presidential candidate last night. Does it really change the race meaningfully?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, there are all these cliches that are fundamentally right, that people vote for president, not vice president, and that vice running mates can hurt more than they can help. And I think people put way too much emphasis on delivering a state. I mean, I think in 2024, nobody's delivering anybody. And, you know, even historically, at most a point or two in a home state, and that's not necessary, that's not really provable. So I don't think it's going to make a big difference in that sense. But I do think he will. I think Walz is going to line up really well with Vance in a debate, and I think he projects. It's interesting that he does two almost contradictory things. One thing is he comes across so heartland and grew up in a farm in Nebraska, Minnesota, all this, and at the same time, the real progressives in the Democratic Party really like him. And it sort of frees up Harris to try to stay more towards the center than you know, she might have to if she were having to like put out fires on her left. And that raises one other point, is that the fact that Democrats got a fresh nominee without having to do a primary, a nomination fight that would pull all their candidates over to the left and way away from swing voters, from undecided voters. I think that's a plus. But this is still, you know, this is going to be a really, really competitive race.
Really interesting, Charlie, because we're hearing everything about Tim Walz. He's everything. He runs a sanctuary state. He's pro-trans. I keep hearing he's giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. Some say that he's a populist economist. But then I heard last night in Philadelphia, he's a coach. It's Coach Walz. He's a teacher. He's an Army National Guardsman. Which identity emerges here?
Well, it probably depends on the eye of the beholder, who's looking. But the thing is, he does have some very, very progressive liberal policies, but he comes across in a more reassuring and not a threatening way. And, you know, in politics, as you guys know, you know, perception is a heck of a lot more important than reality. And he seems to have a good bedside manner, if you will. And I think it's kind of a very interesting pick. I didn't really expect it, but people that have worked closely with him, other governors I've talked to, House members, and to be honest, this guy who served 6 terms in the House, sort of under the radar screen, not a flashy guy, not a self-promoter, but the people that have worked with him closely, they seem to think very highly of him.
Well, not everyone thinks highly of him or highly of the choice, Charlie. There is a narrative ongoing that is being encouraged by the Republican ticket. Donald Trump was talking about this on Fox and Friends this morning. This notion that the selection of Walz over Governor Josh Shapiro, a Jewish man, was an anti-Semitic one. Keeping in mind here that the vice president is married also to a Jewish man, the second gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff. Is that a message that will resonate with anyone who is not already part of the Trump base?
You know, I don't think that's much of a. I mean, heck, did former President Trump picking J.D. Vance and not someone who is Jewish, was that anti-Semitic? No, I think that's kind of, you know, anybody who believes that is going to want to believe that and will believe anything else. I mean, the thing is, I think the race has changed in that, you know, Biden is out of the way, age, health, all that out of the way. But fundamentals are still there. The map is still hard. It still tilts more Republican than Democrat, with sort of, you know, Republican. We've talked about this before. Republican votes being more efficiently allocated around the country, and the cost of living, economic anxiety, border. which were real problems for Biden, those have conveyed over. And it may not be 1-to-1, but it's, 0.9 to 1. I mean, it's very, very close. And those are still problems that she's going to have to deal with. But I think the pick was, it was a solid pick, and I don't think it'll affect the outcome of the election, but it will make for an interesting vice presidential debate, that's for sure.
God, let's see if we get one. Enter the incumbent, Charlie Cook. Political reporting today that aides to Biden and Harris are considering plans to bring him back onto the campaign trail and appear with her. Is that smart, or should Kamala Harris try to stay as far away from Joe Biden for the balance of this campaign?
Oh, I don't think it will. I mean, the thing is that Biden, yes, the Biden administration there was a reason why he dropped 14 percentage points in his Gallup job approval rating between July and October of 2021. And a lot of it was inflation, all that stuff. But at the same time, ultimately, what pushed Biden out of the race was perception that, look, this guy's too old to serve effectively for 4 more years. And I think a lot of voters, to be honest, back in 2020, it was never explicitly said, but they thought this was going to be one and done, that Biden would serve 1 term and move on. And it was never promised. He didn't break a promise, but it was sort of implied, and probably would have been a good idea, to stick with that. But, so I don't think her campaigning, I don't think Harris can. First of all, if she didn't campaign with him some, it would look terrible. It would look awful. So I think doing it some makes a whole lot of sense. But his job, he's going to be sticking to his day job, being president, till January 20th.
Well, as we consider Joe Biden, Charlie, you, of course, in the aftermath of the debate, were on this program talking about how it was already going to be hard for him to win. Now the path had gotten that much smaller. He seems to have ultimately recognized that as well. When you're looking now at the path for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, both of them, whose is easier right now? Or is this simply too close to call at this stage?
Well, to me, the fundamentals still favor Trump, that is, map and the issue agenda. But, Donald Trump has always been somewhat erratic. I think the last 4 or 5 months, he's been more so. And he seems genuinely rattled since Biden dropped out of the race. And, I'm sort of, there's a side of me that thinks that Harris can't win, but Trump can lose. And that if Trump loses, it's going to be him beating himself. And it is kind of interesting that, around Donald Trump and when he was president, it was like total chaos. But there's a sense from the public that the country was doing okay. And during the Biden administration, while he personally isn't a chaotic person, but things in the country and things around the world were increasingly chaotic and seemed out of control. And I think that's one thing that's just sort of working back towards Trump, is that they look back and see his administration, the country, they think swing voters think the country did better under Trump. And so they assume that it probably would again. And they're even
Charlie
willing
Cook,
to put up.
come back and talk to us when we have more time, Charlie. It's great to have you on.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks have trimmed gains. Bonds are falling after a weak U.S. sale. We have got the Dow Jones Industrial Average now trading in the red, giving up earlier gains. Right to the numbers with the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 30 now, lower by 0.1%. The S&P holding on to a gain of 0.1%. The S&P up by 7 points. And NASDAQ still higher, up less than 0.1%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up now by 16 points. The Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares trading lower. It is down now by 0.7%. 10-year 3.94%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.01%. Gold up 0.1%, 23.94 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude is up 2.7%. WTI 75.15 a barrel. Lyft shares slipping by the most in more than a year after the ride-hailing company posted second quarter bookings, and it issued an outlook that did fall short of Wall Street's expectations. Lyft right now down 13.3%. Uber, which reported earnings this week, up now by about 4.5%. So again, recapping, volatility back with the Dow Jones Industrial Average swinging between gains and losses right now. Little change, down 2 points on the Dow, while the S&P up by 0.2%. 10-year 3.95%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Balance of Power continues now, and back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York with a look at the markets. Thank you so much. Quite the turnaround we are seeing. It's been quite a turnaround we've seen in the presidential race as well, as we've kept track of here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We've had a series of questions. The first a few weeks ago was whether or not Joe Biden was going to stay in the race. We got that answer. Would he endorse someone else? We got that answer too. Now Kamala Harris is officially the Democratic nominee. Then we wondered who would join her on the ticket. We learned yesterday that it's Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. We still have one question out there, though, and that is, will we see Kamala Harris share a debate stage with Donald Trump before the election? Remember, she wanted to debate on ABC on September 10th. He's pitching September 4th on Fox, but he had this to say on Fox and Friends this morning.
I don't know how she debates. I heard she's sort of a nasty person, but not a good debater. But we'll see, because we'll be debating her, I guess, in the pretty near future. It's going to be announced fairly soon, but we'll be debating her. I'd like to see it on Fox, by the way.
I'm still exhausted from Kaylee Lyons' wind-up into that moment earlier today on Fox and Friends. So are we going to debate? How about the vice presidential candidates? Let's assemble our panel. Rick Davis is here, of course, Republican strategist, Bloomberg Politics contributor and partner at Stone Court Capital, alongside Janae Wartell, Democratic strategist and partner at ARC Initiatives. Great to see you both. Rick, I don't know where we're going to go on this. You and I and Kaylee and everyone have been talking for months and months about whether you should allow even a candidate on a stage with Donald Trump. Did Joe Biden learn the lesson for Kamala Harris in this case? Because it sounds like this might actually happen.
Yeah, it does sound like it might happen. I would have expected Donald Trump to reject a debate, but because I know, his folks are all concerned by his debate performance. They feel like they dodged a bullet, because even though he did a poor job in the debate, that's nothing compared to the suicide pact that Joe Biden had going into that debate. I guess they feel under some pressure. They want the media narrative to be kind to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, in that interview that you played, was going on and on about how the networks just absolutely love him and are dying to have him on. And so the fanning of the narcissistic flame, is so important to Donald Trump that not saying yes to a network invitation would be a defeat to his ego. So, yeah, I guess there's going to be a debate. And it sounds like maybe sooner than later, split the difference. I mean, these negotiations go on and on like this, but at least we're going to have something to do in early September, it sounds like, and it could actually have a bearing on the outcome of the campaign. So we've seen all kinds of major events lately, and it doesn't sound like we're done with them.
Well, on this idea of it having an actual bearing on the campaign, if we're running with this idea, Janae, that this is going to happen at some point before voters have actually cast their vote, is it more likely, I just wonder what the risk reward is here for each candidate. Is it more likely that it could convince someone to vote for Kamala Harris or Trump, or that instead it could convince voters not to vote for them, but not necessarily to vote for the other, if you follow?
Yeah, so we just have to look at the past debate. When Joe Biden took the stage next to Donald Trump, we saw a tremendous amount of viewer engagement, a record number of viewers tuned into that debate. And I think the reason was because they wanted to see this contrast on full display. They wanted to see kind of this Donald Trump, Joe Biden matchup. And so I think in the same way, given all of the energy that's been surrounding this election, all of the twists and turns that we've seen, I think people are eager to see them standing right next to each other on a debate stage. So I think you're going to have a lot of folks tuning in, not just members of each of their bases, but also voters who are undecided, right? Voters who haven't really gotten to know Vice President Harris in the way that they may know Donald Trump or the way they might have known Joe Biden. They want to really see and hear from her and really be able to put that contrast into context on a debate stage. So I think this absolutely helps Vice President Harris. We know she's a skilled debater. We know that, she's even kind of provoked Donald Trump with the line, if you have something to say it to my face. But I also think she's ready and up to the challenge, whereas I think Donald Trump will regress to the name calling that he's often known for. We've seen his line of attack on her, and I think it will really make him look very small and very unpresidential.
Well, on the say it to my face part, it is worth pointing out that we heard that line not from Kamala Harris, but from Nikki Haley back in February when she was still competing against Trump in the Republican primary, and he refused to debate her or anyone else for that matter, Joe.
How true. You wonder as well if we're going to be talking about a vice presidential debate here. All this stuff has yet to come together. This is just the latest drip that we have from Donald Trump. And of course, Kaylee, that could change the next time he decides to do an interview. I'd like to ask you both about what happened on primary night. This is pretty interesting. Less about the outcome of the races, more about the wait for results in Michigan specifically. Bringing us back to 2022, 538 wrote this up, Rick. A technical change in how votes are reported meant that Wayne County, Michigan took days to report its votes, and we might have a repeat performance here. Less than 1% of the expected vote had been reported in the primary for the 13th congressional district more than 2 hours after polls closed last night. Are you concerned about this, Rick? How worried should we be about delayed results adding to the noise and a lot of confusion in November?
Yeah, I'm pretty concerned about it. I've never quite understood why there isn't more uniformity in reporting procedures. States all, I get it, make their decisions based on state law and the appropriate use of the ballot box in those places. But the reality is, haven't we learned the lesson that the sooner we can get these reports out, the better? States aren't consistent when it comes to, for instance, mail-in ballots. Some states have a vast majority of their votes as early voting mail-in ballots, and some don't count them before Election Day, and others do. And why in the world wouldn't you count mail-in ballots before Election Day and have your responses ready to go in a timely manner? Yeah. I think the American public deserves some transparency there. I think they deserve to know who wins and who loses. I think that's the obligation of these state election officials to create better transparency in the reporting process. And as we have seen, the lack of early reporting results in every conspiracy theory known to man and undermines the integrity of an American election. So, get with it, guys. If you haven't gotten the memo yet, get it. People want to know what happens when they cast their vote, and they want to know in a timely manner.
Yeah, and on behalf of journalists, we'd like to know in a timely manner as well. Say this with self-interest. But as we look to the primaries yesterday, it wasn't just what happened in Michigan, but also in the state of Missouri, Janae, where incumbent Congresswoman and member of the squad, Cori Bush, went down in her primary, the second squad member to lose after Jamal Bowman lost his primary race in New York earlier this year. A lot of AIPAC money, of course, was thrown into that race, given her stance when it comes to Israel and the conflict in Gaza. Is that really what is to blame here? And does that make it a translatable pattern into the general election for other candidates that may find themselves on the wrong side of the line? What do you attribute her loss to?
Well, I think in any election where you have a tremendous infusion of money behind negative messaging, that's going to be influential, right? And that's not about this isolated election. It's about any election. And so whenever you see an infusion of money, such as what AIPAC dumped into this race, you're going to see that there's going to be a driving message that's going to alienate some voters and is going to galvanize other voters. And I think that's what you saw here in this race in Missouri, but also what you saw with Jamal Bowman's race. Getting voters to focus on a singular issue, despite other issues being important for elections of members of Congress. You're going to be able to have a tremendous impact on the election. And I think that when you look at this primary race, I think you see that the spending, the messaging, it was kind of a perfect storm for there to be kind of some backlash against Representative Bush.
Well, millions spent by AIPAC in the primary here against Bush, and the same in New York against Bowman. Rick, what role will AIPAC play in the general election?
You know, I think that they've done their damage on the members who they felt were needlessly negative toward Israel. Their job is to help support Israel and their support in the United States. So I think most of that is done. I would be surprised if they get involved in the general election at the presidential level. So they may pick a few winners and back people in the congressional level. They will start to look at whether or not it's better to have a Republican Congress or a Democratic Congress. And part of that construct is who do they think is going to be president? You know, do you want a divided government? So I think the real impact they have and has been felt and been wildly successful is weeding out some of these folks who they felt were really antagonists to the Israeli cause.
All right, Rick Davis, Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital, together today with Janelle Wortel, Democratic strategist and partner at ARC Initiatives, our political panel. We appreciate it. Thank you both so much. Now we want to get a quick check on world and national news. Amy Morris has that for our 99.1 Newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Kaylee. Vice President Kamala Harris stepping up those efforts to bring rank-and-file union members in swing states back to the Democratic fold, this time with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz on the ticket. They are holding rallies in Wisconsin and Michigan today, with United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain expected to join them at a stop in Detroit. Now, this is all part of a 5-state blitz of battleground states that launched yesterday with a kickoff rally in Philadelphia, where Harris and Walz took the stage together for the first time as running mates. The National Transportation Safety Board is hearing more testimony today. It is the second day of hearings into potentially inadequate manufacturing standards at Boeing. The board is hearing testimony and sifting through mounds of evidence after the blowout of a panel of fuselage on an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 MAX 9 back in January. A group of faith-based investors are warning retailers against selling the abortion pill mifepristone. The letter was sent to the CEOs of Costco, Walmart, CVS, Kroger, and McKesson, and it says the companies risk reputation and legal repercussions if they agree to sell the drug. The coalition behind the threatening letters was led by Inspire Investing. The Summer Games in Paris continue through this week, and at last count, the U.S. has the most medals with 88. China has 61 medals. France has 48 medals, and the U.S. also has the most gold medals with 24. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. All of a sudden, things have gotten very choppy. Last update, I told you the Dow was down. Right now, we have got the Dow back in the green, up by 0.2%. Dow Industrials up 88 points right now. We've got the S&P holding on to a 20-point gain, up by 0.4%. NASDAQ up 44, an advance there of 0.3%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares does remain lower. That index down now by about 0.4%. 10-year 3.95%, with the 2-year on this Wednesday now at 4.01%. Spot gold up $3 the ounce, $23.93, up by 0.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil right now rallying 2.9%, 75.29 for a barrel of WTI. Brent, the global benchmark, at 78.43, up 2.5%. Stocks have trimmed a rally that was driven by the Bank of Japan's reassurance in the wake of historic volatility. Treasuries falling after a weak $42 billion sale of 10-year bonds. Again, the 10-year 3.95%. Briefly, Disney out with a mixed picture after earnings. Disney shares today, they are trading lower by 3%. And in the UK, many of the biggest banks and consultancies are encouraging staff to head home early this week to avoid protests being planned across the country after similar actions morphed into violent riots in recent days. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 19, up 0.4%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet sets the baseline for us on Wall Street. As we continue our way through this Wednesday edition of Balance of Power, we want to get more under the hood on the markets here. Abigail Doolittle is back with us, of course, Bloomberg Markets correspondent, with a better sense of what brought this turnabout today. Are we just selling into strength here, Abigail? How do you see it?
That could be a bit of it. It is certainly a topsy-turvy day. One saying that I really like, there's so many on Wall Street, but is volatility breeds volatility. And we have certainly had volatility in recent times and on the year into the recent pullback for stocks. The S&P 500 had been up about 20% on the year. And then from that peak into the recent dip, almost a correction. And then over the last day, yesterday felt like it was a strong rebound, but I was just looking at it. It was up just 1%. So this is a long way of saying investors are recalibrating, trying to figure out whether they should buy or if the strength of this near-term selling that we've seen, if it's here to stay. Now, very specifically, what's brought about this selling is what we talked about in the last hour, and that is NVIDIA, the chip maker, the AI maker, at its peak on the year, up more than 180%, too far, too fast. Investors getting a little bit nervous, taking profits. Earlier today, it had been up 4%. Now it's down 2%. So Charlie was just talking about the Russell 2000 being down. We also have the chip index, the SOX, down at about 0.9%. Investors just a little bit nervous. And frankly, when you take a look at the downtrend, it's pretty steep. It suggests that there's more work to be done. People want to figure out about the uncertainty of election 2024, the yen carry trade, earnings as they come in, and then, of course, the Fed. Jackson Hole's not so far away.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, Abigail, I wonder what kind of relationship you're seeing between what we're seeing in the equity market versus the bond market. Because, of course, on Friday, after that softer jobs report, we saw a massive bid coming in, especially at the front end. We were down 27 basis points on the day Friday, and then every day this week climbing back up. Same goes for the 10-year. What exactly is happening, and is there a correlation here?
Well, so today's interesting because we're not having that flight to safety that you're talking about there. We're not seeing it for bonds, and we're not seeing it for the yen. Right now, that 2-year yield up 5 basis points, telling us that those 2-year notes are selling off. The 10-year yield up about 6 basis points. So folks are not buying bonds. So today is not overall risk off the way it had been on Friday and Monday. In addition, the dollar yen is actually gaining by about 2%. But something that I would point out is the fact that we did have that risk off where folks were buying bonds and buying the yen. Why are they seeking so many havens? Really a flight to safety. That gets lost sometimes because the risk assets selling off seems a little bit more exciting. But when we think about that, the geopolitics, again, the uncertainty around election 2024. And frankly, I think when people know that things have gone a little bit too far and they're just waiting for the music to stop and then suddenly it stops, people are selling stocks and they're getting into those bonds and yen. Right now, that's not happening. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if we see that safety buying continue at some point this week.
Of course, a lot of it's probably going to depend on the data, too. We got CPI coming up next week, and we have another jobless claims reading coming up tomorrow. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much joining us from New York. Now, as we consider the jobs market, we want to talk about labor specifically, especially when it comes to unionized labor. as the Vice President Kamala Harris is getting ready with her now running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, to travel from Wisconsin, where they are currently, to Detroit, Michigan later today to appear alongside UAW President Shawn Fain at a rally in Detroit. This, of course, comes after the selection of Walz was widely praised by Fain and other major labor organizations, as he is someone who is seen as very labor friendly. We want to dig into that a little bit deeper now and bring in Sharon Block. She is professor of practice at Harvard Law School, where she's executive director of the Center for Labor and a Just Economy. She's also a former labor advisor in the Biden White House. Sharon, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about how labor friendly Governor Walz really is. Is he more so than Kamala Harris, being part of this Biden administration that claims it is the most union-friendly of all time, in a more material way, or are they just singing the same tune on this?
I think that's a great competition to have. I think they both have incredibly strong records for labor. I mean, again, you have Vice President Harris, who has been part of what I think is generally accepted to be the most pro-labor administration ever, or at the very least in generations. I think they've shown that leadership often in very similar ways. Going to Detroit, you have to think about both of them have been very strong supporters for the UAW. Both President Biden and Vice President Harris, and then Governor Walz. You have Vice President Harris really showing leadership within the administration on sort of all issues labor, as she did chair the task force on collective bargaining and worker empowerment. But she's also been a really clear leader on looking out for the rights and protecting domestic workers, care workers. I mean, her time in the Senate, she was very much looked to as a leader in the care economy labor issues. And then you have Governor Walz in his state doing some really remarkable advancements in policy for working people. So I think they've both got very strong records. They have shown that sometimes in similar ways and sometimes in slightly different ways.
Well, they're certainly lining up, Sharon. It's not just the UAW, it's the AFL-CIO. AFSCME says it's a big fan of Tim Walz. NEA likes the pick, the AFT. I could keep going down the list here, but of course, the leadership of the union movement is one thing. Remembering that about a third of the membership of the UAW voted for Donald Trump last time. Who's going to vote for Harris Walz?
So, I think you see in Governor Walz, I mean, he is a union member, right? He spent a fair bit of his adult life as a union member, as a teacher, a public school teacher. So I think that's really going to resonate with union members. But also, we're in a very different place now in this election. Donald Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, they have a record now. And if you look at the record of the Trump administration last time on labor issues, I think this is going to be a very different picture for union members when they go to the polls to make their decision.
Well, what we've heard from not just Donald Trump, but also his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, he has talked a lot about the working man, but he adds in the detail of union or non-union frequently. How should we be thinking about that idea, Sharon? What does that actually mean to you?
I think what that means to me what it should mean is building a working class, a middle class, a working class that can sustain a family, that can provide, security for all workers. Now, I happen to believe, and I think the record is strong, that happens most robustly when workers are in a union. So supporting the labor movement is actually supporting an economy that works for all workers. Union wages, union members get paid more than non-union workers in similar jobs, in similar industries. But when a union is strong in an industry, it actually raises wages for everybody. So strongly supporting the labor movement is actually a way of supporting all workers. And, you know, I think if you look at the Trump record, you just don't see that commitment to either looking out for the economic interests of union members or non-union members. I mean, you had, in the Trump administration, you had an administration that wanted to roll back overtime protections, that, you know, sort of abandoned workers during the pandemic. They are running on a platform, and if you look at Project 2025, it is just full of policies that will really hurt working people. I mean, for example, they actually say the quiet part out loud in that report, that they want to roll back child labor protections. How can anybody running on that ticket say that they care about working people if they want to encourage young people to go into dangerous jobs? So, you know, you can say, J.D. Vance can say what he wants to say, but I think if you compare the records of the Biden-Harris administration and then what the Trump administration did last time they were in power and what they've told us they're going to do next time, it's bad news for working people, whether they're in a union or not.
Well, Sharon, the fact of the matter is Kamala Harris is still trailing Donald Trump, and in some cases significantly when it comes to matters of the economy, even in our own Bloomberg swing state poll, which includes Michigan and Wisconsin, where we're finding these two candidates today. When it comes to how do you handle the stock market, who do you trust more when it comes to interest rates, the price of goods, and the price of services? Donald Trump was anywhere from 5 to 7, almost 10 points ahead of Kamala Harris. So what's the message here? Because we're talking about potentially an economic slowdown this week, a stock market that's starting to look wobbly. Does Kamala Harris deserve to carry Joe Biden's economic baggage with her in this campaign?
Well, I think the Biden-Harris administration has a strong record. You know, we all know there are moments of volatility, but I think if you look at the record of this administration over 3.5 years, I think it's a record that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to be very proud to run on. If you look at the number of jobs created, if you look at how much inflation has come down, I mean, just remembering what it was like at the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration, the sort of crisis that this country was in, that our economy was in. So I think it's an incredibly strong record that she's going to be proud to run on. And again, you just have to go back and look at how the Trump administration treated working people. You know, I think people don't live the stock market. They live, how much do they get paid? Do they have a job? How are their communities doing? And I think when they look at those kinds of issues, I mean, just on job creation, this administration has a record that is second to none. I think that's what, when people have to make this decision, that's what's going to be important to them.
Well, in our final moment with you, Sharon, as we talk about job creation, those numbers are going down. We saw a very soft jobs report on Friday and a higher unemployment rate that caused people to throw the word growth scare around. Given your knowledge of the labor market in the U.S., are you worried that things are going to turn in a more material way in these final months leading to November?
I'm really not. I mean, this summer we can see some volatility. Again, we're adding jobs in the last jobs report just last week. And if you look at the average over the past few weeks, I mean, the past few months, we're still seeing strong job growth. And the uptick in the unemployment rate, I mean, again, we want everybody who wants to have a job to be able to have a job. But you get to an increase in the unemployment rate in two ways. Either because people have lost jobs or because more people are coming into the economy looking to have a job who hadn't had one before. That's what we saw in the July job numbers. And that's an important distinction. I think people are want to come in to get jobs because they see that this is an economy that has been growing, where people have been getting jobs. And so I think it's way too soon to be talking about a trend that is different than the really strong trend that we've seen throughout the Biden administration on job creation.
Well, we really appreciate a great conversation, Sharon. It's good to have you. Professor of Practice at Harvard Law School, Executive Director of the Center for Labor and a Just Economy at Harvard, former labor advisor to the Biden White House, Sharon Block. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington with a lot more ahead today. The late edition of Balance of Power following the rallies in Eau Claire coming up at 5 p.m. Eastern right here on Bloomberg.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week for this Wednesday, August 7th. I'm Carol Masser. He's Matt Miller. You've taken everything out of your teeth. Everything is fine. This is what we do when we start our show. A little peek behind.
You know, it's pretty crazy to see this red across the board on these equity indexes because, you know, I opened the market this morning on Bloomberg Television and we saw gains of 1.25%, 1.5% on the S&P, more for the NASDAQ.
It was a good 2-day run.
Yeah, and there was a lot of breadth. At one point I looked at the S&P right around 10 o'clock. There were 458 companies gaining out of 500. So
It seemed like everything was okay. Having said that, did you check out the 2-year? We're now above or right at 4%.
4%, yeah.
And we're just under that on the 10-year note. So we've really seen a move back up, our yields backing up.
Yeah,
here.
and everybody was clamoring for those bonds. The 2-year, I think, dropped to 364 on Monday.
I know.
So it's been an incredible reversal here. I was happy to see, the divergence, but I guess that's done now too.
Well, a big thing that's weighing on treasuries is a weak $42 billion sale of 10-year bonds. So what we are going to do, coming up once again, Matt and I are going to focus on earnings fundamentals. It really does matter, folks. We're also going to talk about the fundamentals when it comes to the economy. We've got a great guest coming up, Moody's Analytics, Mark Zandi. Yeah, talk macro. He thinks the Fed's behind the curve.
I love to talk to Mark Zandi. It's been a while since I've had him on a program, so I'm glad that he agreed to join us today.
Yeah,
and there's a lot to talk about in this economy because there's some really good signs. Growth looks strong, and there's some disappointing signs as well. Maybe a slowdown in labor.
Hence why we see probably some of the volatility, certainly on the equity side of things. Having said that, 2 tech stocks on our radar, Supermicro and Intel, one dropping like a rock. Can you guess which one? Matt, don't tell us.
I would say Intel.
Nope.
Supermicro?
Yep.
Well, you know what? It's taken a huge hit.
I mean, know. Already.
As the AI maybe bubble burst, a lot of people I know would object to that phrasing. Supermicro took a much bigger hit than NVIDIA.
All right, we're going to talk about that. We've got a most read story, and we've also got a great story about Tropical Storm Debbie creating some interesting lines in the sand. So we'll get to that. You just like what I did, didn't you? Yes. All right, let's get you going with a look at the market trade. Let's get to Charlie Pellet.
I thank very much. Supermicro, by the way, down 18.6%. Yes, you guys have a whole lot more coming up. Stocks struggling for direction. Last update, I told you stocks were higher. Big reversal since then. We have got the S&P now lower by 6, a drop right now of 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 79 now, down 0.2%. At the open, we had the Dow up roughly 240 points. Red on the screen there. NASDAQ down 0.3%, down 45 points. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares now tumbling by 1%. So as of 2:02 Wall Street time, the selling has resumed on Wall Street. 10-year yield 3.94% with a 2-year just below 4% right now, 3.99%. Spot gold, little change, down just under 0.1%, 23.88 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil advancing 2.7%, 75.19 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin, a lot of talk about that asset today. Bitcoin falling 1.8%, 55,560 on Bitcoin. Earnings, briefly, Disney out with a mixed picture as it reported third quarter results. Disney shares right now down 3%. Airbnb plunging by the most ever after the company issued yet another disappointing outlook and warned of slowing demand from U.S. vacationers. We got Airbnb down now by 14.6%. Recapping losses for Wall Street, S&P down 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, we did see stocks we saw actually stocks climbing around the globe, I feel like, right, overnight. Yeah. And yet we're seeing a very different trade here in the United States. We did have the Bank of Japan move to reassure markets.
That's what it was, I think. Those dovish comments from the Bank of Japan, I think, really goosed investors, certainly overseas and then here as well, but maybe not enough to override the disappointing earnings that we were talking about yesterday, right? TripAdvisor, Airbnb, Rivian, all disappointing. And this morning, Disney was bad too.
Which is a really good read on what the consumer is up to. So let's get back to it. It's why we wanted to focus on earnings fundamentals again. Back with us is Bloomberg Intelligence U.S. quantitative equity strategist Christopher Kane joining us here in studio. Christopher, I'm going to be really honest with you. I was listening to the radio, I think it was Surveillance this morning, and Gina Martin Adams once again reminding us about the earnings growth that we've seen. Walk us through. I mean, corporate earnings, U.S. publicly held companies, they're still growing.
They're still growing. Earnings have been very strong. I mean, like Matt said, there is some weakness in the consumer, right? There's those high-profile names that have missed. I think that masks the overall strength of earnings. But generally, they've been very strong. I mean, analysts were expecting about 8% year-over-year EPS growth coming into the season.
Right.
We're on pace for 13% year-over-year growth. So,
but that's worth repeating because the slew of earnings that Carol and I were just talking about were disappointing. And it's really the consumer that's the problem. But overall, and I think, 460 60 companies have reported in the S&P 500. Overall, earnings growth has been, I saw 11%, but you're saying you expect 13% growth year over year. That's good.
We're on pace for, almost 13%. It's discretionary and tech that have been a little iffy, and those get a lot of press, and those are your very famous companies. But overall, like I said, it's been a very strong earnings season. We have about 80% of companies beating expectations, so that's very strong, and by a healthy amount as well.
Having said that, thanks. It's not about what you did for me last quarter. It's what you're going to do for me next quarter and the rest of the year. Analysts upping their estimates on earnings?
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I mean, again, tech and discretionary, a little bit less so, but all the rest of the sectors, you see revisions go up, analysts increasing their expectations, very, encouraged by the recent EPS, results. So yeah, we've seen a lot of revisions higher recently.
When you say tech, you're not talking about the metas of the world. You're not talking about the platforms out there, right? No. Like Amazon. You're not talking about the Googles. You're talking about like the chip makers more.
Yes.
Yeah.
They've been a little bit. That's been a little bit, a tougher sledding for them. Like you said, Meta's been strong. A lot of those platforms have been very strong. But tech is not a monolith. There's a lot of different business models. But overall, that has been. If you want to have a weakness, that would be it. And the expectations are so high there. That's the thing.
One last question. Not every company, right, certainly in terms of market weightings or market impact or market impacts on the sentiment is the same. In terms of earnings, how are you guys describing it? Is it a healthy earnings season, even though there are some outliers that are pretty disappointing?
Oh, very. We would say it's very healthy, very robust. The breadth is there. The growth is there. If you want a fundamental underpinning for this market to continue, and I will mention, I know we've had a dramatic couple of days, but the trend is still up. We're still above our 200-day moving average. The breadth of the market, we have over 80% of companies above their own 200-day moving averages. The market's up 11-ish%.
How many companies above their 200-day?
About 80% of the S&P 500. So despite the last couple of days, the trend is still very strong, and we've had a bit of a pullback and a VIX spike. That's been a good time to get in historically. I think we're still on very strong footing.
I feel like that's a great setup to get into our next guest.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
By the way, it's important to mention because Gina has pointed out that the Mag 7 have delivered great earnings growth, but we've been in the last 6 quarters, we've seen a recession for the rest of the S&P. That's over, right?
Yes, that seems to be reversing.
And that's important to point out. All right, guys, thank you so much. Well, just one guy. You're going to stay with me.
You're not thanking me?
Bloomberg Intelligence U.S. quantitative equity strategist Christopher Kane joining us right here in studio. All right, so let's get to our next guest, and let's talk a little bit about the economy, the soft landing, housing, jobs, and to Mark Sandy, Moody's Analytics chief economist, who joins us right here in New York City. Mark, good to have you here with Matt and myself. We were just talking with our Christopher Kane on earnings, saying very healthy, very robust. He talked about 80% of S&P 500 companies above their 200-day moving average. Does that square with what you are seeing in terms of the economy?
Yeah, well, that's very good. Good to hear. I'm glad to hear that businesses are doing well, earnings are strong. Yeah, I think that's consistent with continued strong growth. Economists look at GDP. That's the value of all the things that we produce. That's up 3% year over year through the second quarter of 2024. Things are slowing. Obviously, the job market is throttling back, but so far that's mostly by design. The Federal Reserve has been working hard to cool things off to get inflation back in the bottle, and I think they've succeeded. Hopefully, they start lowering interest rates here and keep the economy moving forward. But yeah, I think broadly so. I will say, businesses have, certainly large businesses have been doing very, very well. Corporate profitability economy-wide is about as good as it's ever been. I mean, margins are really extraordinary, and that's obviously, in part what's driving the equity market up to this point in time.
Mark, first of all, great to see you. I really appreciate you coming on the program. It's been a while since I talked to you. What about the consumer? We had reports yesterday from TripAdvisor not making as many bookings as people expected. The same was true with Airbnb. Disney came out this morning and said there's not as much growth at their parks, although people are staying home and ordering Disney Plus more often. Is the consumer in trouble here? Too much credit card debt from Taylor Swift last season? I mean, what's going on?
And it's good to hear your voice, Matt. Yeah, it's good to be on with you. Well, if you take consumers as a whole, the consumer elephant is a big thing, and a lot depends on which part of the elephant you're touching. But if you look at the elephant as a whole, it's good. Real consumer spending growth. That's after inflation, consumer spending all in, travel, the things that you've been talking about, what people are spending on streaming, all the things that they're buying for their homes, groceries, everything, up 2.5% year over year. I mean, that's been rock solid, amazingly so, for the last almost 2.5 to 3 years. And that's kind of right down the strike zone, right? That's exactly what you want to see. That's strong enough growth to keep the economy moving forward, but not too strong to fan those inflationary pressures. Now, if you touch different parts of the elephant, you start getting, a different sense of things. I mean, I do think lower income households are struggling, under the high interest rates and the credit card debt and consumer finance loans they took on back a couple, 3 years ago when, inflation was raging and they borrowed against their cards to supplement their income to maintain their purchasing power. And now the interest rates are very high. I mean, I just saw this the other day. I didn't realize that credit card interest rates at 22% are the highest they've ever been in the data that we have from the Federal Reserve. So, that is a lot of pressure. And those households blew through their excess saving early on, after the pandemic. So that part of the consumer elephant is soft and weak, and you can kind of hear it and feel it in some of the earnings announcements and what CEOs of consumer product companies are saying. But high-income households, middle-income households, no problem. They're fine. Just one last thing to say. The folks in the bottom third of the income distribution typically account for about 15% of the spending. The folks in the top third of the distribution account for 55% of the spending. So, I don't think the economy can flourish, and there's all kinds of political and social implications if folks in the bottom part of the distribution are struggling, but the economy can move forward, and it is. Now I just say one last thing and I'll stop. Everything I said is positive, but things are weakening. The high interest rates are doing damage. I think it's time for the Federal Reserve to start lowering interest rates and lowering them quickly and normalizing rates. And they've been late to the game. They've made a misjudgment here, so they have to get moving. But at least so far, the consumer, the economy is hanging tough.
Right.
Credit card interest rates are the highest they've ever been. Mark just pointed out the New York Fed put out today. Total credit card debt ticked up to $1.14 trillion, and that is a new record high as well.
Well, and we had a story, I think it was yesterday, that talked about more folks looking to tap their home equity. I mean, maybe just because they can at this point, but they are looking to do it, and they're not moving around. We know that already. Having said that, Mark, so recession off the table in your view? I mean, obviously, there might be some in the lower income strata that already feel like they're in a recession because they're paying more and they've got either higher credit card debt and it's much more troublesome. But having said that, a technical recession, do we avoid that, or at some point we have to touch it? You've seen lots of market cycles.
Yeah, I've seen many market cycles.
We all have.
Well, look, as long as the Fed continues to hold to a 5.5% close to funds rate target, we can't exhale. The economy is under pressure. Something can break, and when it breaks, it's going to break quickly, and it's going to be very difficult to fix it. I've heard the word "we can fix it." Okay, well, if it breaks, it's going to be very hard to fix it. So they need to move. Now, everything indicates that they're going to. And in fact, if there's a silver lining in this market mess that we've seen over the last week, is it's going to light a fire under policymakers, and I think they're going to cut. And I wouldn't be surprised if they cut a 0.5 point at the September meeting and then be a bit more aggressive in lowering rates after that. If they do that, we're golden. We should be fine. If they don't do that, then we got a problem. And I would say at this point in time, just to put a number to it to give context, I say there's a 1 in 3 probability the economy enters into recession at some point in the next year. That's too high. It's uncomfortably high. In a typical economy, it should be about half that. So it's elevated, and it's going to stay elevated, and it's going to continue to rise until the Fed actually, starts to cut interest rates.
What do you think the terminal rate should look like? I was a little bit surprised yesterday when I typed in FDTR index on my terminal and looked at the federal funds target rate. I had forgotten that they raised rates so quickly in 2022. There were, not only they started with 25, went to 50, and then 3 or 4 consecutive 75 basis point increases, and another 50. So you expect a 50 basis point cut in September, and then what after that? Like, where are they going?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of debate, reasonable debate about what the so-called equilibrium rate is, that rate, R star, that rate at which policy is neither supporting or restraining growth. But I think we can state with confidence it's not 5.5%. I'd probably, it's high. It's migrated higher for lots of different reasons, one of which is that the economy is more rate insensitive than it has been in times past because households and businesses have done a pretty good job of locking in the previously record low interest rate, so it hasn't flowed through in terms of higher interest expense in aggregate. I mean, again, putting aside lower income households and some businesses on the end of the distribution. So I'd say 4%. So if I were them, I'd be trying to get the funds rate target down from just south of 5.5%, where it is today, to 4% very quickly, by the early next year. And then take a look around. Hey, at that point, if everything's kind of sticking to script, hanging together, take a look around, see what's going on. You see how the economy's digesting all that, see what's happening with inflation. And then at the end of the day, my sense is the equilibrium rate out in the middle part of the decade, 2026, 27, is probably around 3%. It's going to migrate lower as liabilities, the interest rate on household and corporate liabilities adjust higher. And that's happening, over time. So that's kind of the path I think they should take. It feels more likely that that's the path they will take given recent events, but we'll see.
What's the role of Jay Powell at Jackson Hole come August, later August?
Well, if I were him, I'd send a very clear message. We're cutting rates. It's just a debate now to how much, and after September, how much we need to cut over the course of the next few meetings, just to lay any concerns, like folks like me who are saying, you got to get moving here, and if you don't, something's going to go off the rails. So I think that's got to be he's got to make this very, very clear, and I hopefully the board can sing from the same hymn book, kind of say, no, there's lots of different views, and that it's okay that comes through, but generally when you listen to the melody, it's got to sound like everyone's singing the same melody, and that they're going to be cutting interest rates here. And if they do that, then I think we'll be just fine. The economy should be able to navigate forward and avoid a recession. If they don't do that, if he sends an ambivalent signal, maybe we will, maybe we won't, and there's a lot of discordant kind of views coming from different board members, then I think what we're seeing in the markets are, the extreme volatility and the red on the screen is going to continue.
Well, Mark, we're really squeezed for time. 20 seconds. What's the one thing you think the Bloomberg audience and investors should keep a watch on? Really a key metric for you, just quickly.
Initial claims for unemployment insurance, it comes out every Thursday morning. It had been around 200K. Right now it's just south of 250K. Anything over 250K, yellow flares go off. Anything over 275 going to 300, then we got a problem. Recession looks more likely than not. So I'd watch that carefully.
We will indeed. Hey, listen, thank you so much. We both appreciate it, Matt and I. Mark Zandi, Moody's Analytics Chief Economist, joining us. Hey, coming up, everybody, super micro slumps and the semi-stock that the street dislikes a lot. We talk tech on the other side.
2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Lows of the day right now on the S&P 500 index, slumping 23 points to 52.16. A drop now of just about 0.4%. We did see a surge of almost 2% in the S&P that was driven by the Bank of Japan's dovish signals, but the S&P 500 right now in the red, down almost 0.5%. The Dow lower by 186 points, down 0.5%. Nasdaq down 105, a decline there of 0.6%. But again, to put everything in context, the S&P down 0.4%, lows of the day. The Russell 2000 index particularly hard hit, down now by 1.3%. 10-year at 3.93%, with a 2-year 3.97%. Gold just about flat on the day, down 70 cents, 23.89 on the precious metal, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil holding on to a gain of 2.7%, 75.16 a barrel. Super Microcomputer plunging after reporting quarterly revenue and profit that missed analyst estimates. Right now, Super Microcomputer down by 19.7%. We'll have a whole lot more on SMCI with Bloomberg Intelligence senior tech analyst Woo Jin Ho coming up in just a moment. So again, recapping here, we got losses for stocks. The selling continues. S&P down 23, a drop right now of 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it. Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet, teeing us up so lovely and so nicely. We do have a few tech companies on our radar. Intel and how Wall Street has lost basically its patience as those headwinds and frustration over the company's turnaround all keep mounting. We'll get to that in a moment. First up, we do want to talk about Supermicro. The maker of data center servers, seeing its shares drop today, off about 18% at its lows, down the most in nearly 4 months. The company reported revenue and profits that missed analyst estimates, outweighing an annual sales outlook that was billions of dollars above Wall Street projections. This stock has been I'm just double checking, the worst performer in, I believe, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100 today. Stock's still down about 80% year to date, up about 80% year to date.
Up, yeah. I mean, this is a picks and shovels play for AI, right?
But it's off 56% from its mid-March high. Just giving you a little perspective that it was up a lot more. You're right, picks and shovels.
Exactly. And this is, like, if you believed that there was an AI bubble, this is what a burst kind of looks like.
It's a good way to put it.
In progress. The question is, is that really happening?
That's a good point. All right, so let's see what Woo Jin Ho has to say about it. He is our Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Industry Analyst of Technology, and he joins us from BI headquarters in Princeton, New Jersey. Woo Jin, how do you see it? Supermicro is certainly not looking so super compared to how it did earlier this year in terms of its share price and expectations. What's going on?
Yeah, so if we're going to use like a virtual reality AI analogy, it's a red pill versus blue pill. The red pill is the AI momentum remains still fairly strong. Blue pill is the gross margin aspect of it. How much do you want to sell your AI servers and at a cost, right? What happened this past quarter was that they missed gross margins by about 300 basis points, primarily because they wanted to sell or add footprint to a particular customer, as well as some supply chain issues with their liquid cooling products. So, like you said, Carol, they raised their guidance by, roughly $2 to $3 billion above consensus at the midpoint, but the margin profile seems a lot weaker because of that.
Why did this company, if I put SMCI on a comp screen, which is a Bloomberg, for those listening who don't know, it's a Bloomberg screen that gives me the performance of the stock. The default is 5 years out. And I put it with NVIDIA. It just makes NVIDIA look like a slow burner. I mean, it absolutely took off for a while at the beginning of 2024. Now it's given up all of those gains. But why did it grow so much faster than the chip maker?
So if you think about it, Supermicro is actually an arms dealer for NVIDIA. But at the end of the day, they were winning a lot of these deals that we're talking about by billions of dollars of deals over the last several quarters, right? Now, if you look at the revenue rise for Supermicro, we're talking about $1 billion per quarter. All of a sudden, we're talking the next quarter's guidance, we're talking about $6 to $7 billion as part of their guidance. So they had this rapid rise in terms of revenue. Margin profile, like NVIDIA, they were the only game in town in terms of selling these AI clusters and they've actually been able to ride the AI wave quite quickly. Now, in terms of the recent downturn since mid-March, as you said, Carol, what we noted in our primer is that they're going to start facing growing competition. Dell has come into the fray, but also you see these Taiwanese ODMs like a Foxconn and Acton and Wistron come in to play a bigger role into this AI server market.
So big deal is competition. You know, it was interesting. Speaking of functions, I was looking at the supply chain analysis. I mean, NVIDIA is its top customer, right?
Oh, that
supplier.
is the best function. If you look at SPLC,
I love it.
Anyone who has a Bloomberg sitting in front of you, that is worth its weight in gold.
Well, what's interesting, so NVIDIA, its top supplier, about 8.6%. Intel is its second biggest. I mean, and I just think about those two companies having some real serious issues, right? And a kind of a bit of a rethink. I do think about the supply chain and where Supermicro fits into all of this. Is that important to think about? And what are the other companies you watch to get a better idea of kind of the outlook for Supermicro?
And that's the irony of it, right? Because I was looking at the same function heading into results as well. And the big talk in town is the NVIDIA Blackwell chip production delays. And the stock was pulling back as a result of the concerns of the production delays. Now, they confirmed that the production delays were happening, and they don't expect the next generation Blackwell chips to occur until early next year. But the issue is they still raise guidance, right? So they're still able to work around these production delays with the current generation chips. So that speaks to how strong the demand on the AI side is. Now in terms of the Intel side, I think Intel has separate issues, but they are still selling chips into Supermicro, and they are still seeing demand on the AI side with Intel chip as well as AMD chips going forward.
You know, Carol asked me at the top of the show which stock I thought was the loser today, Supermicro or Intel. And I just thought Intel because it's a loser every day. I mean, this company seems to get no breaks here. If I look at the SPLC, the supply chain function for Intel, its top customers are Dell, Lenovo, HP, like wah, wah. You know, really a bummer compared to NVIDIA's big customers, Microsoft, Meta, Alphabet, Amazon. I mean, those are the heavy hitters.
What's the PC versus the AI play, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Why has Intel, is it just take too long to reposition itself? And is it just a perma-loser now? Or is it possible for Pat Gelsinger, maybe some other CEO, to turn this company around?
He inherited a lot of bad stuff,
He's been there for 3.5 years.
But he inherited a lot of bad stuff.
I mean, maybe that's not enough time. What's the story?
Yeah, so I'm not the semiconductor analyst, though I do like to talk all things tech, Matt. I will say that there were some strategic moves that Intel had made that made them miss the mark on the AI side. And also, look, if you think about where NVIDIA is, I mean, they essentially won the AI game for at least another year or so that Intel has struggles to catch